All right, so I would like to call this meeting to order. And as you know, this is a Zoom meeting in accordance with Massachusetts state law that allows us to have Zoom meetings due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Does anyone have any questions? No? Can I get a roll call for the advisory board, please? Jonathan Hurwitz.
Here.
Jamil Siddiqui.
Here.
David Lutz.
Here.
Brian Bichkowski.
Here.
Michael Huff.
Here.
Kiara Moore is absent tonight. She had something come up. Kristen Baelish.
Here.
Jackie Katz.
Here.
Susan Klein here. And we also have Kevin Calcutt, our select board advisory liaison. And we have Blythe as always. And we have Ingrid Alardi, who's going to be presenting the Norfolk school budget, joined by many of her school committee members. Thank you for coming. And I don't see, yep, I see Paul Zinni. Paul Zinni is here as well from the KP school committee. I'm sorry, from the KP superintendent, and he has Larry Azar with him. And there are a lot of people here tonight. So let's get started. I don't see anyone else in the waiting room. So we can get going. All right, Ingrid, I'll turn it over to you as long as no one has any questions.
Great. So before I jump into the presentation, Susan, I don't have the option to record. If I hit recording, it'll stop yours.
Okay. All right. Well, it says it's recording, so we're just going to cross our fingers that it's going to the right place and that someone can help me retrieve this tomorrow to get it posted somewhere. So apologies again, guys.
All right. So thank you very much for inviting us to present tonight. I do have Thomas Doyle, our school committee chair, and Medora Champagne, the vice chair, both budget subcommittee members here tonight, as well as Todd Hassett, who's our district business consultant, and Victoria Saldana, who is our director of curriculum. So I'm going to share my screen and I will walk through an overview of our budget presentation. I know some of you have already seen it through the public hearing, so I'm going to consolidate my comments a little bit in the interest of time and to leave us enough time for questions. So once I share my screen, I can no longer see people's faces. So if you have a question and you want to type it into the chat, I'm happy to answer it that way. I'll try to monitor the chat, and otherwise at the end when I stop screen sharing, I can see everybody again, and then happy to take questions. Does that make sense? All right, let me see if I can share this. Just a second. All right. Okay, again, thank you very much for having us tonight, and I look forward to sharing our proposed budget for 2022. As we always frame our budget, we really make our budget decisions highly guided by the district vision and mission statement. So as every year we face budget challenges, we try to make decisions in terms of budget requests that are going to have the highest impact for our children, that are going to enrich the educational programs. And when we're faced with making educational decisions about budget reductions, we have always tried to do that in a way that would have the least impact on our educational program quality and our students. The presentation tonight is divided into 6 different sections. Again, as I said, I'll try to go through them quickly. First is a little bit about the budget history and the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on our district budget. I'll share some information about our per pupil spending comparisons with other regional communities, talk about what's driving our 2022 budget request, a little bit about class size projections. The advisory board has asked me to provide that data in the past, so I'll share that tonight. Some of the cost savings efforts that we have put in place in order to manage our budget request and keep our request as reasonable as possible, as well as some of our unfunded budget needs, things that we will need going forward in the future, but that we are not asking for at this time. And then end by talking a little bit about the return on investment for educational dollars. As the advisory board is probably painfully aware, there was a period of time from 2008 to 2013 where the town of Norfolk and most communities across the state were struggling with a pretty significant economic recession. In order for the district to open the way that we close, open in September the way we close in June, it typically takes about 3% budget increase in order to accommodate contractual obligations, steps and lane changes for teachers, expense increases. So it's really about 3%. Obviously, during the years 2008 to 2013, we were looking at significantly lower numbers. In some years, a negative 4%, negative 1%, 0%. So during that period of time, significant cuts were made to the school budget, to both programs such as foreign language program, enrichment programs, as well as staffing. The last 8 years has been much more budget friendly in the town, and we have been able to begin the process of restoring those losses. We've had, 4.7% back in 2014, and really an average of about 4% a year. So 3% of that cost goes to just maintenance and bringing forward your current staff. And with the additional percent, we've been working at chipping away at those losses and restoring positions. Obviously, at the same time that we've been working towards making those restorations, Norfolk's experienced significant enrollment growth. So we have also had to add positions and add programs to accommodate the growth in enrollment. Fiscal 2021 was a difficult year as everybody struggled with the unknown costs of the pandemic and what the revenue picture was going to look like. The Norfolk community went with a conservative approach to the budget, which led to a 2.47% decrease in our school committee approved budget and our budget request for fiscal 2021. I know we talked at the advisory board about the potential of asking the town to access stabilization funds to offset that loss, and we did not recommend that last year for several reasons. One being with the significant impact of the pandemic across the country, we were anticipating some federal and state aid that would help offset budget losses for this fiscal year. Additionally, because we had to structure the learning very differently than we ever have in the past, we were able to absorb some of those losses on a temporary basis. And we were all really concerned about what the long-term impact on the economy might be of the recession, and wanted to make sure that the town had those funds available to support our budget this year or in future years, as federal dollars and state dollars may not be available to continue to offset COVID costs. So during the special town meeting, revenue came in slightly higher than the town was projecting, and the town voted to restore about $4,000 to our budget, which reduced our gap or our reduction to about $231,000. We did have to make further reductions to the budget at this time, primarily in the areas of curriculum and technology. As I said, because of the way that we were providing instruction this year in a hybrid learning model, with only 50% of our students in the building at any given time, we were able to absorb some of those cuts without impacting programming. So when I came last year, I was able to report that we had restored classroom teaching and educational paraprofessional support positions, funding for new curriculum updates. We had partially restored our health education program, and we had done that by our students had physical education once a cycle. We've increased it to twice a cycle, and a portion of their physical education classes are devoted to health education. We had partially restored staffing for the technology program and library program as well, and we had been able to eliminate additional fees for transportation and tuition for the full day kindergarten program. With reductions that we experienced last year, we did have to make some further cuts. So we had to cut the funding that we had added back to new curriculum adoption that had previously been restored. We eliminated the technology staff position, and we did eliminate the 0.9 librarian at the Freeman Kennedy School. Again, as I said, we were able to absorb that loss this year because with the COVID pandemic, we delayed implementing any brand new curriculum programs in science and social studies. Also, students weren't able to visit the library this year, and we weren't allowed to circulate books for the majority of the year. So we were able to absorb those losses this year. We also had to make some additional reductions. Last year, I presented a request for an additional assistant principal so that we would have a full-time assistant in each of the 2 school buildings. That was approved by the school committee and in the school committee budget, but we had to reduce it before we ever were able to fill that position. We also had to eliminate a 0.5 school psychologist and our 2 lunch monitors. Again, because we weren't serving lunch in the cafeteria, we were able to manage some of those losses this year. Our average school budget increase, when you look at the last 15 years, is about 2.27%. Again, significantly, I think it helps to provide the picture of why when you face a recession and significant cuts, it takes so long to bring programs and staffing back. If you look at how Norfolk compares to the state in per pupil spending, you can see the graph. The last available data from the Department of Ed is for fiscal 2019. They haven't released the 2020 data yet, so that's not included. But you can see that there is a significant gap in what Norfolk spends to educate each child compared to what the state spends. Back in 2013, that gap was about $1,000 per child. We started to close the gap in 2015 and 2016, but then we saw another increase in enrollment and decrease in town revenue. So we're back in 2019 with almost an $1,000 gap between what Norfolk spends and the state spends. The Department of Education gives you a series of comparison towns for the purpose of looking at curriculum, programs, staffing, any kinds of comparison data. These are
Guys, can you hear me? Ingrid, can you hear? Ingrid. Okay, I'm muting Ingrid for just a second. Let me see if I can chat with her to get her to see that there's something wrong with her audio.
Susan, I texted her.
Okay, great. Thank you. Ingrid, I'm going to unmute you and see if it's still doing it. Ingrid, if you can hear me, I think I've muted you, so we can't hear you. If you can hear me, give me a thumbs up. Okay, I'm going to have you quit, and I apologize to everyone. I'm going to have Ingrid quit and rejoin, and then I'll make her a host again and get right back to this slide. Hopefully it'll only take a minute. Okay. Sorry, guys. Seems that we're having multiple technical difficulties tonight.
Thomas, you're ready to jump in and take over, right?
Well, say, Susan, that's a new one. I've never seen that one.
Right? Of course it's going to be me. Why not?
This just supports our budget need. I mean, our audio is clearly deficient, so we need to have that taken care of.
All right, here she is.
Except she's doing it from
just
home.
1 second. Wow, Zoom meetings are always so much fun. All right, let me make you a host again. Nope.
Can I suggest calling in? So you can switch on by the microphone. There's a little tab that says switch phone to audio, or switch switch to phone audio. It'll give you a phone number you can call in, and it won't use your computer audio.
Ingrid, did you hear that? Give him a thumbs up if you can hear that. Okay. So she's going to attempt that.
I'm getting hungry. I want a cookie or something.
Oh, goodness gracious.
This is a test of the emergency broadcast system. Had this been actual emergency.
Mm-hmm.
This might just be a ploy for that tech hire they need.
Right? Where's that technology director again in the budget?
But imagine you're a classroom of hybrid 6-year-olds right now. Would you still be paying attention to school?
What's even worse is it'd be a hybrid classroom of 12-year-old boys. They would love that. They could see the jokes writing themselves.
Okay, she's texting me back. She doesn't see this on her end, the ability to call in.
Okay. So I'm going to
The,
try it one more time.
oh,
She's got to unmute. As soon as she unmutes, we'll know if it's doing it still. Okay. Ingrid, I'm sorry. Ingrid, I'm sorry. I'm going to try one more thing. I'm going to have you quit out of Zoom, quit out of Safari, reboot your computer completely, and call in using only the audio. And then I can see if, I hate to throw him under the bus again, but I might have to see if Kevin or someone can share the presentation for you. And you can just be verbally on the phone.
Susan, if you can share the presentation, what we might also try is having Ingrid call one of our cell phones. I've had that happen in the past where I've been on a Zoom and someone has also been on the phone on speaker. And if we had the phone close enough,
Okay.
we could try that. If Ingrid wants to try calling my cell phone or somebody's cell phone, we can try putting her on speaker, and then you can see about just sharing her presentation.
Okay. Ingrid, let's try one more time with you rebooting your computer. And then if that doesn't work, we'll just have you exit out and call using someone's cell phone. Is that okay? Can you hear me? Okay, great.
There's 1 second. I think she's trying to do something else.
Okay.
I also asked her if need be, if she could send the slide deck to me, and maybe I can see if I can get it uploaded, and she could just sort of narrate if we can get the sound correct.
Yes. Yeah. I have it as well. I actually posted it to the agenda for tonight, so I think everybody has access to it. And
All right,
I
we can get that part.
part of the reason I
put in
did
the chat
that
that
was
she thinks it's fixed, and she's asking you to unmute her.
We take bets.
Yeah, should tell her to unmute.
nope.
It's only been a year. After another year, this will be all wrinkled or ironed out.
so does anyone remember max headroom?
Yeah.
This is what's happening.
Oh, wow. Okay. So maybe she can call on someone's phone, and someone who does not have a Mac, because I can't do it, I have a Mac, can share the slideshow, the presentation, and she can speak to it that way while maybe also uninstalling Zoom on her computer at the same time. Maybe that would work. I'm so sorry.
Well, at least we're recording this and we'll have this forever. So we got that going for us.
Right.
Susan, you can't have a Mac to share it, you're saying? It has to be not on a Mac?
Oh, I'm sure there's a way to do it, but I've had 3 people try and we cannot figure it out, because the only options it gives me when I go to, and Ingrid said she has a Mac and she could tell me how to do it, but she can only do it from opening up a browser. But when I try to screen share, it gives me 3 options. It gives me a Dropbox, Google Docs, or Zoom itself. And the files are not on Google Docs, and the files are not in Zoom, and they're not in a Dropbox because I don't have Dropbox, but I'll eventually figure it out. The problem is I need to sit with someone, the tech person, in person to do it. And he was out this week. So that wasn't possible before tonight's meeting, which we didn't think would be an issue because Ingrid was fully capable of sharing it. And so is Paul until this happened.
So does somebody have the ability to share it here?
Yes.
Okay.
I know Kevin can. I'm sure Thomas can. I'm not sure about Medora. I haven't heard what kind of computer she has or if she has the ability to do it or not.
I can share it. I have a share function available. I don't have the deck. So I think Thomas would be the better.
Yeah, that's why I asked her if she gets in a bind to have her send me the slide deck and then I could
Well,
share it.
I have it in an email. Why not, ready to go, the email that I sent earlier today to the advisory board. So I'll just forward it to you.
I have it up and available right now too.
Can you screen share?
If you enable me, I think I can.
Well, let's just do that because that is just easier.
The other suggestion I have is, would you like to flip flop? We almost always, or we've always kind of segued with the elementary, then segueing into KP. The two budgets, I mean, can be interchanged. If you'd like, while we're trying to fix things with Ingrid, if you want Larry and I to begin the KP process. Oh, nope, there's the.
Well, I just shared it with Brian.
Never mind.
She's in the waiting room. So let's admit her and see if this works. If it doesn't, we'll have Brian share and we'll have her call Thomas on her cell phone.
She also can call directly that number that Todd listed. That's the dial-in number.
Mhm.
She'd be able to talk directly into the meeting.
That's the 929-1205?
Yes.
Okay, I'm texting it to her.
She has not enabled her sound yet.
Hi, Susan. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. All right.
Okay.
So Brian has the screen shared. So if you want to just have it on your computer and be muted, and
Yep.
that way you can just tell us what page you would like him to be on as you go.
All right. So I don't know, was it fuzzy from the very beginning? Do I need to go back to the start, or did
No.
it stop?
No, it started about a minute before I finally muted you and got the thumbs up, because at first I thought it was just me.
Okay.
So, and then I started getting the text from everybody else saying they were hearing the same thing. So
Ingrid, you were on per pupil spending comparison.
Yeah, we got past the
Okay.
pupil spending comparison up to 2019. That was the last slide, I think was.
This is where you went bluey. Yeah.
Yep. So I'll start on the per pupil expenditures. Just one thing, Susan, to check before Paul goes on to present. When we first opened this meeting and we had to log out, did you close it on your computer, or do you have two meetings open?
I believe I only have the one. I exited out of the other one, and
Okay.
I said kick all attendees out. So
Okay. So just as long as you don't have it open twice, because then when whoever you make the co-host will have the same problem.
okay.
So just before Paul joins. Okay. So as far as per pupil comparisons, we do have a series of districts that are identified by the Department of Education that we use for comparison when we're looking at academic data, when we're looking at curriculum and programming, or staffing, or financial data. They're all other regional districts. And if you look at that data, you'll see that Norfolk consistently is in the very bottom of per pupil, annual per pupil costs. You can go to the next slide. So we currently, based on our last set of fiscal data, we're spending about $865 less for every pupil to educate our students in Norfolk than the state average. With our current enrollment of about 990 students, that equates to almost $1 million less per year in education spending in Norfolk than your average district in the Commonwealth. Next slide. So the 2022 budget request and drivers, we can jump to the next slide. We are currently looking for an increase of 5.09%, which is about $665,000. This budget request, while it seems on the higher side of what we brought before the advisory board in the past, again, as I said, we absorbed significant cuts last year that we have to bring back to open in September in a traditional school manner. So the budget request for 22 would allow us to maintain our level services, allow us to meet contractual obligations for salary increases, contractual changes for the bus contract, things like that. We are looking to restore the new assistant principal position that was added in last year's budget and then cut prior to our ability to fill that position to balance the budget. We do need to restore the Freeman Kennedy Library position. We expect to offer library and media services and instruction next year, and we will need to staff that in order for us to return to that. Additionally, we have increased enrollment at the age of day. We added a kindergarten class last year, and that class will be moving up, so we'll have to have 8 first grade classes next year. In order to meet the requirements and provide specials, instruction in art and music, we're going to have to increase each of those positions by 1 day. We would have had to do that last year, but we were providing specials virtually. So this year we didn't have to account for travel time between buildings or those additional course classes because of the way we were providing specials. We are looking to increase, as I mentioned, we cut the technology integration teaching position at H. Olive Day last year. We need to restore that. And we also are looking to increase that position by 0.5 and make it a full-time position. That will allow us to have much better recruiting power. It's been difficult to fill as a 0.5 position, but also our network has expanded significantly, and we've been critically short in terms of break-fix support in the technology department for a number of years. We hired a full-time tech support person this year through grant funding, and that ends in June. So in order to address that need, we're looking to increase that position. We're looking to add a developmental math paraprofessional position next year. We do anticipate, as every district in the Commonwealth is expecting, our students who are learning in a hybrid model, we expect will have not learned at the same pace as they would in a traditional year and may have some learning gaps that need to be remediated. So proactively, we're looking to increase staffing in math to provide that instruction and help our students recover any academic loss that they experienced. And we are also looking to restore some funding for new curriculum adoption. As I mentioned prior, we did not fill or we did not move forward with the recommendations for updates to our social studies and science programs this year. It was a difficult year to expect teachers to implement new instruction and new curriculum based on the fact that they were transforming all of the way they were providing instruction. So we delayed that to next year, but we will need to fund it. Next slide. So a summary of the budget changes, if you look by category, our teachers for their contract next year have a 1.75% increase in COLA. That equates to about $350,000 or close to $350,000 of our total budget increase. All of our other staff are budgeting a 1.5% COLA. We did have to make some slight adjustments to our paraprofessional salary scale as we were falling behind in the market, and our para scale was behind KP, Rentham, Plainville, Franklin, and we were losing some of our veteran staff to other districts, so we had to make some adjustments there. We're anticipating 2 teacher retirements, so we expect we'll save about $55,000 in costs from the salaries of those 2 retired teachers. Next slide. Budget changes in terms of staffing. As I said, we were looking to add back the assistant principal position that was added to last year's budget and then cut as a result of the pandemic. That position is going to be incredibly critical next year for a number of reasons. First, most of our children will only have been in the building this year with all of their classmates for about the last 8, 9 weeks of school. When kids come back in the fall, we know that we are going to need to have significant support available from our adjustment and guidance counselors for students that may be anxious about returning or struggling with the impacts of the pandemic socially, emotionally. And our guidance counselors currently provide all of the required consultation, and they oversee all of our 504 district accommodation or 504 student accommodation plans. That will transition to the responsibility of the assistant principal in each building, which will free our mental health staff up to provide a lot more coaching and support to students and families who might need it. Additionally, the assistant principal is responsible for a teacher evaluation and instructional coaching. And as I said, we will have new curriculum that we're implementing, and that person will be supporting that as well. Bringing back the librarian and FK, as I've already talked about, the art and music teacher increases, the technology integration and math. The only things on this slide that are different, again, reminding that we have to put the 2 lunch monitors back in place. And we do need to increase our team chair who coordinates special education meetings and our occupational therapist by 0.1, which is half a day a week to meet the demands of our growing population of special education students. We will be reducing an aide position from kindergarten. We have a slight decline in kindergarten enrollment. And next year that will move up to first grade. We don't have assistants in our first grade classrooms, so we can reduce that 1 position. And at this point, we are anticipating reducing the 2 temporary custodians that we added this year through to support us with the additional cleaning and demands of the COVID pandemic. Do the next slide. On the expense side, things are really pretty much level funded. As I said, we have to put some funding in to support the curriculum adoption and changes we need to make to our science program and social studies to be fully aligned with the changes to the state standards. Each of the day supply lines up slightly to accommodate that additional first grade class. The Freeman Kennedy and classroom technology lines are down by about 4,000 each. We are increasing our instructional services for special education to support consultation for some students with specific special educational needs. Our tuitions and transportation lines are both down. The major other categories here, pupil transportation, that was an estimated increase for our bus contracts. We just got back the bus bid and it came back slightly lower than our estimated cost, although we've been recently notified that we should expect to see some increases in special education transportation as vendors are going to be adding cost per pupil for cleaning and maintenance. So I think that's going to net out. I don't think we're going to see a total much savings in that line. Facilities maintenance, again, additional cleaning supplies, PPE gear, that lines up by about 18,000. And technology network is Wi-Fi bandwidth, other kinds of AP devices we need to replace in order to maintain the network. So that's up by about 5,300. Next slide. If you look at the overall budget increase, 3.6% of our total 5.1 is driven by contract requirements. 1.4% is restoration of positions that were lost last year or funding in curriculum that was lost last year. 0.3% is driven by enrollment. That's primarily the increase to art and music to accommodate the new classes at each other day. Our overall special education budget's down by 0.4%. And other costs, that 0.2 is really the increase to the technology support of that 0.5 position. That leaves us with a total of a 5.1% increase when you round. Next slide. If you look at the breakdown of our total budget, the vast majority of our budget goes to fixed costs, which would be salaries. So almost 70% are professional salaries, which would be teachers and administrators. 3.6% to clerical salaries, about 14% other salaries, which would be custodial salaries, food service, other employees. 8.1% goes to services, and that's primarily our bus transportation contract. Only 2.6% of our total operating budget goes to supplies and materials. 0.9% is other expenses, which are primarily fixed costs for retirements and other contractual obligations as people leave the district. And only 1% of our total budget goes to tuitions, out of district tuitions. Next slide. Again, the advisory board in the past has asked me about class size projections. So if you want to scroll down. The primary class size projections for 21-22 are all within our district class size policy. You can see the class sizes range from a low of 18 in grade 2 to about 22 in grade 3. So they're all within the policy limits. We are not expecting any increase to classroom teachers, so no new teaching positions. As we do every year, because we do follow a zero-based budget approach, we look at enrollment and determine how many teachers we need at each session. So you can see that we'll be down a kindergarten teacher, up a first grade teacher, so teachers move to accommodate the enrollment shifts. Next slide. Again, compared to the same comparison communities, you can see that Norfolk is at the lower end with higher class sizes than most of our other regional comparison partners. Next slide. Cost savings. Every year we recognize that the town has limited funds and you're trying, especially the advisory board's role is to allocate those among the departments in a way that's fair and will support the town in meeting the town goals and providing strong services. So next slide. We work really hard to find ways that we can shave our budget request and manage money carefully. For the past several years, we've shared the facilities director and the HVAC maintenance support position. Between the two of those positions, we save about $90,000 annually. With the addition of some of our, the assistant facilities director, who also has a license for general contractor, we've been able to do a lot of in-house construction without dealing with outside vendors. So the plexiglass partitions that we had to put in for student learning in the main office areas and in some of the classrooms were built in-house. That was also really helped us with our reopening and reopening on time because there was a critical shortage and districts were struggling to access that kind of equipment early on. So we saved money and expedited our plans. We've managed things like replacing tile, painting, all of those things in-house. We've saved funding on that. We have a shared custodial position that we share with the town, and we staggered that work schedule. So that position works Tuesday through Saturday, and that's cut down on our weekend overtime costs. And we've continued to grow and expand our in-district programs for students with global developmental delays. And we brought some additional students back to the district. So we have about $333,000 we'll save next year in special education costs. And then as KP, I'm sure will address as well, we have worked on competitive grant writing regionally and are bringing in about $130,000 in competitive grants next year to supplement our budget. So the total savings is about $600,000. Sorry, next slide. Again, I always try to remind the advisory board of the town that it is really critical beyond the core value of providing a strong education to students in Norfolk and to children in the town and community. There is a fiscal implication if we don't continue to maintain reasonable class sizes and strong educational programs. We do have two major charter schools in the area, the Benjamin Franklin Classical Charter School in Franklin and the Foxborough Regional Charter School. If students choose to leave Norfolk and enroll in one of the charter schools, the state aid that we receive, that the town receives that supports our budget follows those students. So for every student that leaves to go to a charter school, we lose approximately $15,000 in state funding. And most students, when they leave the district, are gone for multiple years. So you can multiply that annual cost over multiple years. Next slide. Again, we were very conservative on what we brought forward to the town. We know that many departments are recovering from costs lost in last year's difficult financial times. So we are at this time not asking for the following positions, but will need to bring them forward in future years. We still would like to see continue to increase our developmental math staff and add a full-time developmental math teacher to provide small group instruction to students that are struggling. We would like our librarians both to be full-time again, as they were back in 2008. We right now will have a 0.9 librarian at the Freeman Kennedy and 0.8 at HL O'Day, but we are going to manage with that next year, but we would like to see those be full-time. We would like to restore the school psychologist position that was cut at $39,000. And we have had a drastically, rapidly growing increase in our ELL, English Language Learner population. And in order to meet state mandates and requirements for service delivery, we're going to need to increase that teacher and assistant position in the coming years. Again, as I said, we are critically short in district technology support. I think the industry guidelines are you should have one support position for every 150 users. We have two full-time tech support staff right now, and they support over probably over 1,500 users. We have one-to-one devices with every child right now, and then we also have about 250 staff members. So they are really stretched thin. Additionally, with the rec department and other groups using the buildings throughout the summer and the short period of time we have to clean and turn the schools over, we are looking in the future to add additional custodial summer help. Next slide. Expense things that we are not asking for at this time. Again, we would like to add an additional day to the paraprofessional staff's work year in order for them to be able to participate in district-wide professional development. They support many of our most vulnerable learners, and we want them to be able to access the same professional development that we're providing to our teachers during the course of the school year. And we have wanted for a number of years to eliminate band fees so that that program is free and accessible to all students. We have not been able to bring that forward at this time. Technology replacement, we also shared with the advisory board the capital plan. So this is also listed in the capital plan, but it reflects the cost of replacing aging technology in the next fiscal year for smart boards, teacher laptops, and other equipment that is aging out. But again, that's reflected also in the capital budget, so I'm not sure what direction that will go depending on how the town allocates those funds. Next slide. I think it's important to speak to the return that the town sees on their investment in educational dollars. So we can jump to the next slide. As far as measures of educational quality, students in Norfolk continue to demonstrate high standards and achievement. We performed in the top 18% on state Mcas tests back in 2019. Again, they were not given in 2020, so there is no new data on that. We have strong research-based programs for social emotional learning at every grade level and lower than average rates of student discipline or bullying incidents. We continue to have outstanding arts programs, visual arts, music, chorus, and an award-winning band program. As I mentioned earlier, our students have physical education twice a week. Most of our teachers have advanced degrees and more than 10 years of teaching experience, and we have a very low turnover of staff. And as you're well aware, our facilities are in great shape. They're clean, they're well maintained, although we do have a pending project with MSBA for an expansion. We are short of space and maxed out at the HLFA at this point. Next slide. I won't speak to these at any length. You can take a look at them, but this just shows you the data of how Norfolk compares to the state on the English language arts MCAS scores. 2015 and 16, the state did not report average data because districts had the option of taking the PARC assessment at that time. So you can see our data is reported, and then the years that the state had average data, you can see the comparisons. And the next slide will show you the comparisons in math. Again, we continue to outperform the state on both. You can jump to the last slide. And I don't think you can play this, but I would encourage you, this is a video that gives you a glimpse of what teaching and learning look like in the Norfolk Public Schools this year. So you can see that, but since it's a PDF that you're sharing, you can't see it, but take a look. And then I'm happy to take questions. So if we stop screen sharing, I should be able to see you again and hopefully respond to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ingrid. First, I'd like to go to the board, the advisory board, to see if anyone has any questions.
I'll go. This is Kristen Balish. Can you hear me, Ingrid?
Yeah.
So I have a daughter in kindergarten at HOD, and one thing we're seeing is that the kindergarten are going back not the same way full time that the rest of the groups are going. They're going for half days. And that has been because of essentially room constraints because of the 3-foot rule. So if that distancing rule is still in place in the fall, how would that impact the budget potentially? Would the kindergarten classes stay the same way and there would be no, cost differential, or where is that kind of showing up in the budget if you needed to find more space at that point?
So at this point, we are looking at a variety of options for kindergarten, but the most recent guidance that we've heard from the Department of Ed is we do expect that there will be, if the trend data goes down and we see fewer cases with immunizations increasing, that the distancing requirements for lunch we're expecting to be relaxed, and we'll be able to accommodate more students for lunch in our cafeteria, which has been the biggest challenge for us with the full return. Additionally, the incoming kindergarten class is smaller than the current class. We have 170 students in the current class and 130 enrolled for next year. So that is also helpful. And we are also looking at alternate options for relocating office staff and consolidating plans. So we are not expecting a significant impact to the budget to support the full return next year. If these restrictions remain in place, then we have to look at other creative solutions. We have been hearing that there will be significant funding available through the ESSER 3 grant to offset potential COVID costs, as well as potentially additional funding coming to the town. So at this point, we're not anticipating needing it. We are anticipating the distancing requirements to be relaxed, a smaller incoming class, and the capacity over the summer to look at relocating some offices to open up some space.
Right.
But we do have those grants available should that hardship hit.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Brian?
Hey, thanks. I noticed with the technology refresh and the capital expenses, the 120K a year, with all the kids having the Chromebooks now, and I understand that technology is actually for like the smart boards and the like. Have you thought about, do you need smart boards and that in the future, or can we take some of the lessons from remote learning to inform the capital investment plan for the in-classroom experience?
So I'm not sure. I'm not sure what you're asking in terms of the smartboard replacement. Are we looking to change what we'd be buying for equipment based on what we've learned from the remote learning? Is that what you're asking?
Right. Do the capital needs change when the learning experience is maybe different in the future, given what we've learned from remote learning?
Yeah, I don't think that it's going to change the capital needs request. We did make some adjustments to our long-term replacement plan based on lessons learned, and we also had the opportunity, because there was funding. Our tech director applied for a tech replacement grant that was available in response to COVID, so we were able to accelerate the replacement plan on some of those devices. We are relooking at whether or not we would continue with individual one-on-one devices at the lower grades, or whether we'd go back to putting equipment on a cart. So what we have asked for already accommodates the change. I don't expect that we will be providing individual devices to the lower grades going forward. The smart boards, we're looking at new technology, and what we won't be replacing them with the current models that we have in classrooms. The ones that we're looking at have more flexibility and in what they can provide and what they can do, but those costs are already built into the capital request. So we did take a lot of new learning from implementing instruction in this way, but our tech team's really been looking at that and making adjustments to our long range plans in response to that.
Great, thank you.
I hope that the new smart boards have the technology for remote learning built in. Whether it be the ability to have Zoom calls from the classroom up on that, or a way for the teacher to be streaming from the smartboard to any remote students. Hopefully.
Yeah, we have a current platform set up that is a workaround. But yes, I mean, the new smartboards have more capability, and right now teachers could bring up a Zoom call on the smartboard, but in order to broadcast or present information and interact, we have cameras in the classroom as well as laptops that teachers are using. But yeah, our tech team has been, I think, really aggressive at looking at the new technology, and then also developing cost-effective workarounds for the short term. So.
Okay. I don't see anyone else's hand up, so I'll go ahead and ask my question. My question to you is, the things that you're not asking for right now, that you need restored, are you able to adequately operate with a full return to school? I mean, obviously things like the librarian, you're only able to really do that right now because we're not in school and they're not having library in and of itself anyway. But when you do go, I mean, I hope I speak for everyone when I say that we're back to a full return in the fall completely. When you are able to go back to a full return, fingers crossed, in September, are you able to operate at the lower level?
So in our budget request, we have asked for a restoration of all the critical positions we need to reopen in September. So the librarian's included in the budget, as is the assistant principal and a developmental math assistant. The two positions that we are not asking for at this time are an additional developmental math teacher and the 0.5 school psychologist, and the increase to library. We can operate without those for next year. We are hoping that if the ESSER 3 grant comes forward, that we may be able to, through that, fund the psychologist and the developmental math position and bring those forward. We would love to have those next year. but we can operate without them. There's nothing else in our budget that we can reduce in order to get those positions in. We were pretty careful, as you saw when you looked at the expense slides. We cut out a lot in order to try to bring in the positions that were essential. But we are still hopeful that those two positions might be able to be funded through ESSER 3. We just don't have the federal guidelines yet. We have some sense of what that money will be allowed to be used for, but the federal guidelines have not come out, and we haven't got the clear guidance from DESE. But those would be the two priorities should we able to bring additional things back.
Okay. And Blythe, I don't know if you're ready to answer this or not, but we spoke briefly about the capital expenses for this coming year. And you had mentioned when you did your budget presentation, you weren't sure if any of that money was going to be used for the schools or not. Have you figured that out yet? Do you know, or are you waiting to see what if the grant money comes in?
I'd say a combination of that, Susan. We haven't started the capital budget for the fall at all yet, but what Ingrid has requested is already in there over a couple of years in what's thought about for 22. I'm hopeful that we're going to end FY 21 in much better shape than we thought we would, and there'll be ability to tackle some more capital in the fall. But it's hard to say at this point exactly what we'd fund, because there may be things that come up between now and that we'll have to address as well. And I'd echo Ingrid's comment about the federal funds. We understand that the federal Department of the Treasury is the one that writes the regulations of what all the money can be spent on, whether it's coming to towns or schools directly. And none of us have received that detail yet, so it's hard for any of us to say exactly what we can do. But we're watching it.
Okay, great. Thank you. Does anyone, I don't see any hands up from the board. Does anyone else on the board have any questions?
I've got one, Susan.
Okay, great.
Dr. Alardi, Jamil Siddiqui here. Thanks for being with us tonight.
Sure.
My question is, during the presentation, one of the slides for the proposed budget this year mentioned a $60,000 reduction to special ed tuitions. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So we have had a commitment over many years to, whenever possible, provide education for students within our local district. So we have built brand new programs that allow us to keep students in district and provide the services that they require in order to make effective progress. So based on a new program that we've opened at the Freeman Kennedy and that we have staffed and developed, we're able to bring some students that are currently outplaced back into the district, which reduces the cost for out-of-district tuition. So that's been an ongoing commitment. Every year you have seen in the budget presentations reductions in our out-of-district costs and savings in special education. Our special education budget is significantly lower than it was many years ago as a result of that. But that reduction in tuitions is a direct reflection of programs we built in-house that have allowed us to provide a strong quality education and meet students' individual needs within the district versus outplacement.
Susan, I have a quick question.
Sorry, I was muted. I was talking. You just couldn't hear me.
Susan, I have a very quick question. I did just a quick sort of like plus minus thing. You are adding staff this year, but are you going to have to actually lay people off?
Not at this time. Not if the budget is supported at the request. We're not anticipating laying anyone off. So
you're moving bodies around basically, or?
Yeah, in terms of the teaching positions, when you see a -1 in one grade level, that position would be moved to a different grade level. And we do that annually based on enrollment. So sometimes teachers are interested in teaching at another grade level. Sometimes we have to transfer people from one grade to the next. But we base our staffing on our enrollment. So this year we have 8 kindergartens because I have 169 students, with it going down to 135 probably by the time we open. We only need 7. So we will reduce a kindergarten teacher and assign that person to a different grade level. Yeah.
So this is a net plus then, right? Yep.
Yep.
All around, it's a net plus.
Yep.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Great. Anyone else have any questions, even outside the board?
I know last year we had to give the notification of possible terminations. I assume with the state funding that came in, we didn't have to pull the trigger on any of that. Is that right?
We were able to recall most of the people that we had to give notice to last year. The school psychologist, the 0.5 position, we were not able to recall, and so that's still on our list. You see that under reductions, and we're not able to bring that back this year. So there was one reduction that we weren't able to restore, as well as there was a technology integration position, but we did not fill it. We had somebody that retired, and we were unable to fill it. So there were some, in response to David's question about net zero, some of these positions will bring us back to where we were prior to last year. So they're not necessarily adds in terms of body count. But yes, we brought all of our teachers back. We were not able to restore that one last position based on funding last year.
Thanks. That's super helpful context.
And Ingrid, correct me if I'm wrong, just because I think people might have the question this year. The reason we had to do the layoffs last year was because town meeting vote approving of the budget was so late in the year based on when you have to notify people, and that shouldn't happen.
Yes.
Because
that shouldn't happen. There was a number of actual factors, Susan, that occurred. One of them was the Department of Education changed the guidance on the reopening plan mid-cycle. So we were all planning on a full return, then it went back to a partial return of students. With that, we got guidance on transportation very late. We learned that our capacity based on the guidance was only going to allow us to put 25 students on a bus versus 75. So we had a lot of unknown potential costs in transportation and for reopening. And we did not at that time have a sense of what the federal funding would be. So because we didn't have an approved budget, we didn't know what the federal funding was going to be, and we didn't know what the ultimate or what the final costs for implementing the COVID guidelines were going to be. We had to provide a contractual notice to staff of the potential for reductions. Based on the law, if you don't provide that notice prior to the contractual deadline, you cannot lay anyone off. Right. And we didn't know if we were going to have enough funding to keep all of our staff. Because of those unknown variables. And that was very late in the budget process for us to find out that there may be hundreds of thousands of dollars of additional costs for transportation or for implementing safety regulations. So that was a notice that was given to meet that contractual guideline because of the financial unknown. And as soon as those conditions became clearer, we knew we had grant funding, the town voted to approve the budget, we started recalling people in seniority order. So yeah. That was great. And I think you probably saw most districts were in that same position. And when you notify people, you notify all of your non-professional staff, not one or two, because it's not a performance issue. It's a potential reduction notice. And you have to give yourself the flexibility of not knowing where those cuts will be or how deep they have to go.
Okay. I don't see any other hands. Anyone else? Kevin, can I ask you a question, a select board question, please? Just a timing issue. Have you approved this year's budget, overall town budget, including the schools yet?
No, we haven't voted on any of the budget items yet, but we do hope to be doing that in, I think, not this meeting we have coming next week, but the following meeting after that. Blythe, that's correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Ingrid. Thank you.
And I apologize for the sound. This is probably my 1 millionth Zoom meeting, and I've never had that happen before. So I apologize. If anyone has questions, I'm happy to answer them individually. So I apologize for that.
I don't think it's anything any of us have ever seen before.
No, very bizarre. All right, have a good night.
Thank you for
turn it over to Paul.
Thank you.
Hi, Ingrid.
The Norfolk School Committee members for attending as well. I appreciate it. If there's no further questions for Norfolk, I'd like to move on to KP. All right. Thank you, Paul. Welcome.
Thanks, everybody.
Good evening, everyone. I'm joined tonight by Larry Azer, the business manager, and Larry knows the budget inside and out. And so I am going to ask Larry to do the majority of the presentation this evening. Although if you've seen the Larry Paul show, you know that we bounce off each other quite a bit during these presentations. We are aware or understand that you already had access to the presentation that we gave to the community at our open hearing, which was a much more involved and extensive presentation. So we tried to keep it to the key elements this evening, but we are certainly prepared to answer any and all questions that you may have this evening regarding our budget. I will remind you that as we move into this budget that we work very, very, very hard to try to provide a responsible, respectful, and realistic budget to the communities. And this year was particularly interesting because as we looked at the assessments for the three communities, it was very clear that the assessments did not come out in an even type of split. And in fact, as you'll see much later in the presentation, Plainville was the big loser this year, is if you were to look at it that way, and Plainville is already in a very difficult situation with their budget. So we tried our level best to truly try to provide a budget that met the needs of the students at King Philip, but at the same time also was responsible and respectful to the people who were trying to put that budget together. So that being said, I do hope, as I said, that you've watched the full presentation, and I particularly appreciated that at one point, Dr. Alati talked about the investment of the money and the education. She talked about Mcas scores and many of the other important pieces that come with the education. It's important for you to have seen that presentation because we have a tremendous amount to be proud of at King Philip. And quite honestly, we're thrilled with our districts, Norfolk and Plainville and Rentham, because they build a very strong foundation. And then you turn the students over to KP to finish that education. It's one education, just two parts, but it's KP that builds the house. We put the supports in place, the roof over it, and make it a home that will last our students a lifetime. And we're very proud of the education our students receive at King Philip. With that being said, Larry is sharing his screen right now. And I will ask Larry to walk you through a few slides to kind of give you that broad overview of KP's budget for next year.
All right, thanks, Paul. So can everyone see my screen here?
We can.
You can? Okay, great. So like Paul said, we went through our whole budget hearing last month. It's I think 106 slides. We trimmed it down by about 90% for tonight, but if there's questions on anything, we have all the backup slides if we need to refer to. First up, we have our the enrollment by the three towns. You can see Norfolk's enrollment is down slightly this year, but we do project it to go up in future years, and I think that's consistent with the trends we're seeing coming up through the elementary and the upper elementary that'll be in KP in the next couple of years. And importantly, the percentages of each, that's the enrollment comes from each town because that number is used to divvy up portions of the assessment. So we'll be referencing this back shortly. Again, similar to what Ingrid did for the elementary schools, we also do cost comparisons. Rather than do per pupil spending, because we're only a middle school and a high school, and so to compare that to other districts that have a full K-12 is not really apples to oranges. So what we look at is what's called the net school spending, which is it takes all your spending, but compares it to what the state sets as a target. So if your net school spending is at 1%, for example, in this chart, that means you're spending 1% more than what the state requires. So I know there's a lot of information in the chart here, but so what the 5 lines compare to, so the green line is KP. Then we have the purple line right here. That's the average of the 3 elementary districts, so Norfolk, Plainville, Rentham. Then we have the blue line here. That's all the districts that are in the Hockomock League, all the towns around us. The dotted red line is the state average. And then this brownish line on the top, that's the average of the other. There are 12 districts in the state that only have a middle school and a high school, like KP. So this brown line is the average of all those districts. So it's a little bit of apples to apples. So having said all that, you can see that KP is at the bottom of all those comparisons. We're spending 17% more than the requirement. The state average is 26% more, and so on. And so if you were to convert the gaps in those percentages, so again, so KP spending 17.4% over requirement. Our peers in the Hockomock League are averaging 21%. If KP was spending 21% more than average, our budget would be just under, would be $899,000 more than it is right now. So hopefully that makes sense. The state average is 26.2. If KP was spending at that level, our budget would be $2.2 million higher. The elementary districts are averaging 34.7% over. That would be an additional $4.3 million to our budget. And the other districts that have only middle school and high school are spending 40% more than requirement. That would be $5.7 million more than we're spending right now. And I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm not sure we could even spend all $5.7 million if it was in our budget.
Trust me, Larry, I would find a way to spend it.
Well, capital project aside, yeah, I mean, we could obviously do it, but that's about 20% of our budget. That would be a big, big number. So next slide. Okay. Unlike the elementary districts, but similar to the town, we have what's called excess and deficiency. It's essentially, what it is the regional school district equivalent of free cash. So it's made up of funds that are unspent from the prior year's budget, as well as revenues that exceed projection. So you can see in back about 10 years ago, the balance was 1.2 million. It got spent down. It crept back up again. And then we had a negative year here. And then I got hired and so the last 4 years, what are you going to get a plug somewhere, right? And then the last 4 years, you can see is right around plus or minus $900,000. And last year it came in at, we just got certified at $1.35 million. So we are projecting in our budget for next year to use $400,000 of that, same as we've done the last couple of years. So that's about a third of the balance. That does leave us some reserves, and especially in these times where things are more uncertain than they have been in quite a while, we do want to keep some of that in reserve because that's basically our only reserve fund balance.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that we can keep up to 5% of our allocations in E&D. So we're not at that mark. You can see we're at, this year is the healthiest E&D that we've had in a while, and that is only at, what, about 3%, Larry, I would say.
Yeah, just under 3%. I think it's 2.9 or something.
Yeah, so we're not putting too much money in that account or keeping in that account. I just want to be clear on that. When people see that money, they think that that's a lot. It's really not.
Right, and so even though it's got certified at 1.35 million, right off the bat, we're taking 400,000 off of that. So come July 1st, that's going to be back down to about $900,000 where it's been the last 4 years. So, so we also, in addition to the E&D, we've also, the last couple of years, we've received a number of competitive grants. We just received a federal grant from the Centers for Disease Control on Drug-Free Communities. It's a 5-year grant for $125,000 for 5 years. We just hired a director to head that up and get that program launched. Looking forward to that. The last 2 years, so last year and the current year, got a grant from DESI for behavioral and mental health and wellness, and we've that grant is shared actually with the 3 elementary districts, so the 4 districts share it together. So you may know we have a director of wellness for the 4 districts, the 3 communities, Dot Pearl, who does tremendous amount of work. She's been invaluable during COVID, organizing testing clinics, She tried to no avail to get scheduled vaccination clinic. Actually, she had it booked, and then the governor canceled all local vaccination clinics. So she's been working hand in hand with our food service manager to do curbside meals. Paul and I just had a little celebration with the food service staff this afternoon. They have distributed 58,000 meals to families through the weekly curbside pickup program. 58,000 meals since the middle of September. So just an astonishing number from that. The next one is a Systems for Student Success grant for some small amounts. The next one was a huge one for us this year, a technology grant. It came out of one of the first batches of federal COVID money, and it helped allow us to go to a one-to-one device program. So all the kids in the district now have their own Chromebooks. So no more carts that teachers have to sign out and schlep across the building from the library to their classroom and so on. We were able to get that grant. So that was a huge, huge plus for us. And then we've had some other smaller grants for digital literacy, for summer learning. So just in the last 2 years, almost $1.5 million of competitive grants. These are the grants that we had to write up, compete for, and were awarded. So hats off to all the folks who helped us, in particular our assistant superintendent, Dr. Susan Gilson, who was instrumental in writing a lot of these grants, our tech director, Michael Boyce, on the tech grant.
And Larry,
And so
before you go
speaking of
on, I just want to also
yep.
point out what Dr. Ingrid had pointed out earlier, and that is that more than ever before, I think, we've been all working together collaboratively. Dr. Gilson, Dr. Alati had mentioned it in her presentation. Larry made reference to that, the wellness grant. We've written multiple grants together to try to create that system of supports from the elementary right through to high school. So I think some great collaboration has been going on, working and sharing resources.
Yep, definitely, right. And so speaking of technology, we knew from, that the environment was heading into a hybrid or remote environment this year. So as I said, we got the grant to do the Chromebooks. That was subsidized with the 3 member towns from funds that they got directly to the towns were gracious enough to share some of that with the district. So that helped pay for the Chromebooks as well. We also, at the end of last year, we bought, again, knowing that we were going to have teachers be doing live streaming and so on, we needed to beef up their equipment. We bought all new laptops for all our teachers. And we paid for that with unspent funds from last fiscal year, because when we shut down in the middle of March, a lot of things we stopped spending on. We stopped spending on school buses. We weren't purchasing supplies and materials and other things. So we had savings from last year's budget, so we paid for those out of that. And other smaller things, obviously we needed our own Zoom subscription. You can't cut off after 40 minutes for the free trial or whatever. And then after a while of doing the live streaming, we realized we needed to improve the audio. So we bought desktop speakers for the classrooms to improve the audio. And then the last thing we were able to do towards the end of the fall, we purchased what are called ClearTouch monitors. So they're essentially like giant TV screens, maybe like 60 inches, 70 inches, I think. They're mobile. And they essentially serve as smartboard, but they have a lot more functionality. They can move around. Teachers are using them with the smartboards, so they can, where you have classes that are some kids at home, some kids in the classroom, some at home. They can put, the Hollywood Squares Brady Bunch Zoom picture on the monitor, still do the teaching on the screen. It's all integrated. So we purchased those, one for each classroom, and we're financing it over 5 years. It's a purchase, so at the end of it, we'll pay $1 and we own them all. But to balance it out of the budget, we're splitting it across over 5 years. and we're paying for that out of just the regular operating budget by redistributing some funds. So that's how much we sent. But in the bottom right, the comment in blue, if you add up the value of all this equipment, it's almost $1 million worth of equipment that we've integrated into the district in the last 9 months or so. So all the teachers have new laptops, all the students have their individual Chromebooks. We have enhanced monitors and video in the classrooms and the audio, and it seems to be working very, very well. So, you know, out of every crisis or challenge comes an opportunity, and this is the opportunity we took advantage of to really beef up the technology.
And I do want to emphasize, if I can, as Larry's moving on to the next slide, the importance of that in trying to provide a quality education for our students at KP. Remembering that at the middle and the high school level, it was virtually impossible to create remote learning pods, if you will. At the high school, every single student, and there are over 1,200 of them, have a unique individual schedule. So when a student has to go remote, even whether it's just for quarantining purposes, they have a unique schedule that has to be followed. There was no way for us to provide students who are remote with the education that they needed unless they were to have synchronous learning and to Zoom into the classes. And the only way to manage that effectively was through those clear touch devices and having every student have their own device so that they could actively engage in the learning process. So the technology was essential to the learning process this year. The teachers integrated it beautifully, and the great news is that it lasts more than a year, so we now have it moving forward. And so there's the win in a bad situation.
Right, thanks. Again, similar to what Ingrid talked about, we have a number of efforts we've been doing over the last couple of years to mitigate on the budget. The first one being on health insurance. Again, as a regional district, we are essentially our own municipality, so we have to procure our own health insurance. So our budget includes health insurance. The last 4 years, you can see there have been very modest increases. The cumulative increase over 4 years has been under 14%. So about an average of about 3.5% a year, which is we think is very reasonable. For legal service, this is something that Paul is really focused on. We've had a decrease of 76% in legal fees just in the last 3 years. Similarly, on the special education tuition, and this is also Paul and our Director of Student Services, Lisa Moy. It's been a decrease of 48% in tuition from FY19 to what we project for next year in FY22. And in our facilities department, we've cut overtime by 65% since 2017. And also earlier this year, we signed on as a third-party beneficiary of a solar project where we're getting net metering credits on our electric bill. So we're saving about $2,000 a month from that. And all we had to do is basically sign a piece of paper, and we're getting these credits. So just some of the examples of things we're doing to keep our budget under within reason. And again, there's a couple of positions that were requested and discussed in our budget process, but we did not include them. One of them is a world language teacher at the middle school. So currently our model is students start a language in 8th grade, and they have to choose either French or Spanish without having been exposed to either one of them, and then they go on their way. What we are proposing to do is to hire a teacher for 7th grade and give the students exposure to both languages in 7th grade, and then in 8th grade, they could choose one having had some experience with it, and then they can move forward with that. We have in our media arts department a request to upgrade a lot of the technology there. We held off on that for the time being. We want to see how the new Chromebooks and the other technology we've purchased fits into this. So it's something we'll probably revisit next year or beyond. We had a request to replace the music equipment, and then just a variety of other items that added up there. So about $183,000 worth that we didn't include. So what we did include, and this slide I know is a little busy. This is consolidated from what you saw on the 106 slides, but the detail of all this is in that larger presentation. You can see that. So the bottom line here is that our operating budget is only an increase of 3.46% from this year to next year. And we're calling this a level service plus budget. And the plus is that there are two positions that we're adding to the budget. One is the restoral of a science engineering teacher at the high school that was cut back in 2018 during that critical year. And the other one is a new position for an adjustment counselor at the middle school, which we think is very much needed, not only for that age group, but also in everything that's going on in the environment now. We know that mental health and those types of things are a big area of concern. So those are the two positions that we're looking to add in. Other than that, everything else is just keep doing what we're doing. And so it's a total increase of 3.46%. And then, as you know, we need to divvy that up amongst the three towns. So we go through the state formula. There's a couple of factors that are in the state formula that are sort of levers that make one town go up, one town go down, so forth. So the first of those is the foundation enrollment. And what the foundation enrollment, that is every student that the district is financially responsible for. So what that is in addition to all the kids that attend KP, it also includes the few kids we have that go out on school choice and charter schools. We don't have very many of those, but they are counted in our numbers. So you can see here, Norfolk's Enrollment Act went down 23, Rentham's went down 17, and Plainville went up 6. Those may not seem like large numbers, but as we go through, you'll see them sort of tacking onto each other. The municipal revenue growth factor, that's a calculation that the Department of Revenue does that essentially calculates how much additional funds are available to be put towards education in the community. Yeah, Norfolk went down, Plainville went down a lot, Rentham slight increase. The required local contribution, Norfolk's went down, which is somewhat rare, but it does happen. Plainville's went up a lot, Rentham essentially flat. And then the district enrollment, going back to that first slide we showed you, that's what divvies up everything that's above the local contribution. So Norfolk went down, Plainville went up, and again, Rentham was basically flat. So what that translates to, and I know this is a little bit busy too, but there's a number of things we want to point out. So if we're looking at FY22, so that's for next year. So Norfolk's assessment is projected to increase by 2.08%, 2.08. Plainville, unfortunately for them, is going up 9.99%, and Rentham 4.07%. So the total, the aggregate of those three is 4.8%, and that's higher than the operating budget increase because we're estimating state aid to be essentially flat. That may change. If it does change, then these numbers may be revisited. But right now, we've been given no indication of any. We've only received the governor's budget proposal so far. We haven't seen anything else. So the orange highlights here are in each year. That's the town that had the biggest increase. So you can see it goes all over the place. One year Norfolk had the highest increase, then Plainville, then Rentham. Now it's Plainville. I think those of you who've been around this for a while, it's sort of like a hot potato thing. Different factors can go into it, and it's one of the questions we're always asked is, well, how can we predict our individual town assessment from year to year? Well, you really can't, based on the formula that's being used. So Norfolk is coming in at just over 2%. You can see the averages for the last number of years. You know, they do average out over a period of time, but in an individual particular year, there's, you know, somebody's got to have the highest increase. So that's what we have right now. And time for questions. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. Larry, if you want to stop sharing the screen for a few minutes.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. All right. Anyone have any questions to start? Yes, Jonathan.
Yeah, going back, I think it was the first or second slide where it was comparing the average, or I'm sorry, the spend above the state required minimum and comparing KP as a district to other districts, and kind of KP was at the bottom. I'm sorry, but I missed the point of that slide. Was that trying to demonstrate, hey, look how awesome we are because we've got all this quality programs, et cetera, and look how inexpensively we're doing it? Or was the message that we're supposed to take from that of, we've got a problem, we have gaps to fill, we're not competitive against our peers, look how little we're spending per student, we're far behind? It was a little unclear to me what the intent or the message from that slide was supposed to be.
I would say all of the above.
I was going to say, yeah, it's actually both, and I don't mean that to be flip. I mean, yes, I think we are doing a very good job with the budgets we have, but we could be doing a lot more with a greater budget. You know, like Paul said, you know, he can spend it, and I agree. There's a lot, that list we said of unbudgeted needs, there's a list that's even longer than that, that is even sort of farther off than that. You know, we're trying to be reasonable. But I would say it's both.
And I would say also, you know, in the 3 years that I've been here with the budget, we've had to do countless presentations to lots of audiences. 3 towns, select boards, finance committees, our own board. And some of those, the budget is well received, and in some of them, people think that our budget is frivolous. And I think it's important for people to understand. And you heard Dr. Alati say that each year her level service is 3% minimum. She said that in her presentation. We're asking, or our ask for our budget is a 3.46 overall increase. And so what we're trying to point out is, in the time that Larry and I have been working together in the last few years, we have done our best to be responsible when we've come forward with a budget, but yet to still build the highest quality education possible for our students. And had you seen, you know, I'd looked at the whole presentation, you would have seen that that was also blended in with the significant list of accomplishments that KP should be very proud of.
Yep. Well, one quick follow-up, and I apologize if this is perhaps a little bit of an unfair question. I could appreciate the challenges you face as a district encompassing 3 towns, 3 different potential demographics, 3 different perspectives on what they should spend, and you've got to navigate all of that. So I think it may be an unfair comparison to say, well, look what Hockomock Town A is spending compared to KP, because that's going to be a much simpler budget process, and maybe as a single town, they may prioritize education a bit more. But we were far below, I think, the average spend for the other similar districts that you mentioned, where they encompass multiple, you know, regional districts with high school and middle school. So maybe, again, maybe this is an unfair question, but presuming they've got the similar challenges of navigating different budgets, different towns, different perspectives, all of those sorts of things, why would we consistently be lower than even the apples to apples comparison with those other regional districts?
Well, why you're lower is because of how you spent over time, how that impacts the district. And I'm not sure, maybe Larry will jump in and answer that question a little bit differently, but I think it is a significant point that we should be thinking about this year. When we've been in COVID hybrid, we've heard the state talk about bringing students back at 3 feet. Most districts went into hybrid mode where they had half the students in the building on A day and half the students in on B day, And they did that by keeping their students at a 6-foot distance. Our classrooms are so small and our class sizes are so large. Probably close to half of our classes at the high school are running between 25 and 35 students in them. That just to get to an AB cohort rather than an ABC cohort, we had to go to a 3-foot distance. And now that the Commissioner of Education is saying, bring everyone back to 3 feet, it's safe to come in at 3 feet. They're using school districts like KP that have been at 3 feet all along to say that. Our neighboring communities are going from 6 feet to 3 feet and bringing every one of their students back in at the middle and the high school level. We're at 3 feet and trying to desperately figure out how to go with room stretchers. If we had funded the budget at the levels that we had seen these other communities been funding over time, then we would be looking at much smaller class sizes and a much different scenario than we're facing right now. So it didn't happen in 1 year. You're seeing that chart shows you from 2010 to 2019 a trajectory where all along KP has consistently been getting smaller increases than the other communities that we're comparing to, and that gap is getting larger and larger.
That would be with an expansion of the school size, correct? The only way you could do that is with a bigger high school and a middle school.
Well, we would actually have to go to teachers on cots at this point, because you're right. Our building has 34% more students in it now than it did when the building project happened. So
Right.
we have very little space, and the classrooms themselves are small. But many schools, to overcome those kinds of issues, don't have every teacher assigned to a room. So some teachers are basically a teacher on a car. So I could add more teachers and have smaller class sizes, and we would just keep the classes rotating. So in other words, so David, for example, if you're a teacher in the building, it's a 7-period day, you teach 5 classes. You have a duty period and a prep period. So for 2 periods, your room may not be used. So new teacher in might be Michael. Michael would not necessarily have a classroom assigned, but he might teach one of his classes in your room, and then he might teach another class in Jamal's room, and he might teach another class in Kevin's room during the course of the day. But we have an extra teacher teaching it.
Which is sort of what we've had to do at the middle school this year, to fit all the middle school kids in, for the 3 feet. That all the middle school teachers are on carts. They don't have assigned classrooms this year.
Can I ask a quick follow-up question, kind of on one of Jonathan's questions? Who is in the comparison, the regional comparison of middle school, high school regions that we're comparing ourselves to?
And that's one of the slides that Larry pulled out.
I'm just
no,
Yep.
David.
No, that's fine. Hang on a sec, I'll get it.
I'm sorry.
He's pulling in his slide. He's fantastic at pulling up the charts for you. So there you go. Look at
There
that.
you go. Can you guys see this chart? So on the left, that's all the districts in the Hockomock League, including the 3 elementaries. On the right are all those districts that have only middle school and high school.
So where's
and the one note on this is that is that all of those districts except for KP have what's called a superintendent's union. So their upper districts, so like Dover Sherborne, for example, that's a separate district of a middle school and a high school. Then there's also a Dover Elementary and a Sherborne Elementary. So it's 3 districts, 3 school committees, but they have 1 central office. KP and our elementaries here have 4 separate structures. So I don't want to get into that debate, but that means that KP.
That's a separate question.
KP is that, right? Yeah, but that's a list, and so KP is actually shouldering a larger central office cost than these other ones, and we're still spending a lot less than them.
Jonathan's question. Jonathan's question to me, and maybe this was his intent, maybe it wasn't, but it's always so. The answer to why we're asking for a smaller amount of money than what we need is because we've always asked for a smaller amount of money than what we've needed. That's what I heard.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, we're not asking for we try to balance this out. My first year here, I was told that a reasonable budget to bring to the towns was 3%. we have tried to come close to 3%, stay under 4% when we've come in with a budget for you. And as you can see, when we came in at 3.49, the assessment for Plainville is a 10% increase. So we have to bring something to the three towns that we know will pass all three towns. And while Norfolk, in my time here, has been very generous and has fairly quickly said we'll cover our allocation, the other towns have struggled a little bit more, specifically Plainville. And so when we ever saw how that was playing out, we knew that Plainville could not support something higher. And so bringing that to you was just irresponsible. We were asking Plainville to increase their allocation, but their allotment by 10%. So that's the tricky part of it.
Okay, got it.
I want to get back to this in a second, but I'd like to get Brian's question first. But just remind me that I have a question about this.
Thanks. My question's actually aligned to here. Given the discussions last year going into the final vote, the amount we agreed to was the amount that was requested that we approved at town meeting was tied to what you thought could be approved by all towns. What is the current understanding of the town's ability to, at least two of the towns, to approve this level of funding?
As far as this year goes, Brian, well,
Yes.
I've had preliminary conversations with the town managers. Rentham hasn't been committal. I mean, Blythe knows that, you know, she's working with all of you. So, but we feel good about at least the allocation that's coming, you know, to you. You know, it's only a little over 2% increase. The town manager in Plainville has jokingly said, well, we know it's our year. It just fell that way. It would have been even worse if it had been that bad last year. We know that Plainville, we've been working very closely with them. We worked with them all last year around trying to provide the data they needed. Actually, Larry and I met 2 nights a month with them all year to try to help prepare for their override. They have voted to go forward on their election day to ask for an override again to try to support their budgets. But last year, I believe it was a 10% cut across the board to all of their other departments, and KP got an increase. So we are faced with Plainville community asking us to put forth, we actually had community members come to us asking us to put forth a 0 increase budget to be respectful of Plainville's situation. And we've said our responsibility is to build the best budget possible to provide the highest quality education to all 3 towns. That's what I put forth. What you then vote back for us, we live with, and we try to do the best we can with. But it's a tricky balance to try to come up with that right number that all 3 towns say that they can support, because our percentage increase is still less than what many times is the share that the town actually has to put in. We're only going up by 3.46%, but Plainville has to come up with 10% more of their budget this year to cover that. So that becomes problematic, and it becomes problematic for people to even understand.
But the question I have, and I've asked it every year I've been on the committee, and I apologize for asking it again, but it is really only 2 towns that need to approve the budget, and the third town has to go along.
Right.
So at some point, Plainville has to do an override. I hate to say it, but you know, I'm not trying to be fresh, but at the end of the day, they're adding more kids into the school, obviously. And if they don't do an override, then their elementary schools, their police and fire, everything else gets cut. That's not my issue in a lot of ways.
Which is why you have a 3.46 budget, why you have a level service plus. We didn't come back to you.
No, I understand. I appreciate that. Yeah. But I'm just saying,
yeah,
I appreciate your requirement to try to balance this stuff. But at some point, you need to come forth with what you need and let 2 of the 3 towns decide. And you've done that. And they failed to do it last year, and they're going to fail to do it again this year. So,
like I said, it's a tricky balance because you're right. Two communities have to approve that. Now, again, this year, Norfolk is looking good. Rentham is looking at just about 4% increase. And, that's stressful on them after coming through COVID as well. So if it came out as an even split, if we said we're getting for example, Dr. Alotti's coming to you, she says, I need a 5% increase, and that means 5% to you. We're done. For us, we're coming back and saying we're only asking for basically a 3.5% increase, but here's the wonkiness that happens with that. It means 4% for Rentham, it means 10% for Plainville, and when you look at your charts, in other years, it meant over 5% for Norfolk. And so when you're trying to build your budgets and you're trying to estimate what KP is going to come in at, we try to balance making sure that our students get what they need. And again, the positive side of this is we try to keep the presentation succinct. And you know that Larry and I are talkers, and so it could go on for a very long time when we do the full presentation. The flip side of that is we spend a considerable amount of time talking about all of the great things going on. KP is dramatically outperforming the state. Your children who go to King Philip are walking out of King Philip with a top-notch education, what I would say is a private school education at a public school price. You have a tremendous amount to be proud of.
I guess it sounds like where your conversations are now is it's likely that Rentham and Norfolk would agree to this level. So and to David's question, I look at chart 2 about the future projections, and I worry about Norfolk's position in 23. When we have that bolus of upper elementary entering into middle school, I think we will wish for the good days of 9% increases.
Yeah.
And we, as an advisory board, need to be thinking about what that means 2 years down the road when that red line starts peaking up, because that 9% for Plainville is barely an upward slope in that blue line.
Yeah, and I believe actually that the Norfolk Elementary District now has more students in it than the Rentham Elementary District.
Yeah.
So that has crossed over a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I'm happy with where we are this year, but we need to figure out how do we do that. Otherwise, we're going to look at potentially 3 years of overrides in a row.
What I would tell you is the budget we presented to you, we feel is responsible, and we feel that it continues to grow the programs we need. So for example, that level service plus, there were 2 additional positions in it. That's where the plus came from. And we felt for this year, we could do that. Now, we've also been fortunate, and Larry showed you a slide around mitigating costs. When I arrived at KP, and some of you will recall that my background is in special education, King Philip had almost 60 students in out-of-district placements. It was a very large debate about the exorbitant cost of special education. We will be finishing out next year with the low 30s.
Yeah. No, what I'm saying in no way reflects on the budget you're putting together. It's about us as a town. And
no, I understand, but I heard at one point, why wouldn't we ask for the budget we need rather than just, a lower budget? In this particular case, in the last few years, as Larry and I have put this to you, we've tried at the same time to reduce the costs in other areas. And we've done that. We've had a dramatic reduction by putting policies, procedures, and systems in place. So we've dramatically reduced our legal service costs, dramatically. And we've reduced our special education out-of-district costs, which is one of our largest bills in any district, by almost 50% over that 4-year period. And so that money has gotten rolled back in to continue to enhance the quality of education. So we haven't had to cut any staff in the last few years. Every year we've grown it a little bit and a little bit and a little bit. Would I like to grow it a lot? Absolutely. I have I have big grand plans if you want to, give me unlimited resources, but we also have to be respectful for what the towns can afford. Other questions we can answer, concerns that we can allay. Susan, had you said before that you had a question that related to something we were talking about earlier? I don't want you to lose that.
Yes, sorry. I was just trying to get out of the screen I was in. What is the process? When you have the overall 4% budget, or I'm sorry, 3% budget increase, and we're at 1.9 and Plainville's at 9.8. I understand the process of as long as Norfolk and Rentham agree, then too bad for Plainville. However, the money has to come from somewhere, and you can't get blood from a stone. So what are you going to do if they can't give you this amount of money, which is a 9.8% increase?
So Susan, we need 2 out of 3 towns, and then the third town just has to comply. And that's what happened last year. Rentham and Norfolk voted the budget. Plainville had no choice. They were the last vote. They knew Norfolk and Rentham had already voted it. But their budget was so bad and they didn't get the override that they looked at 10% cuts across the board in every other department, including their elementary school. Their police and fire have been decimated. And Larry and I work with those departments trying to support them. That's not what we want. I don't want King Philip to thrive at the expense of the other departments. You need police.
You're not thriving.
Strong education. You need it all.
You're not thriving.
I'm sorry, David.
You're not thriving. You can't say you're thriving when you're asking for a 3% budget increase. I'm sorry to beat this like this, but you cannot say that you are thriving with a 3% budget increase. And I'm sorry that one of the towns has to bear a 9% budget increase, but you cannot say they're thriving. They have to balance their budget and understand the impacts of this, or get out of the district. I'm being.
David, I guess I'm unclear as to what your message is.
Say KP is not thriving.
I would disagree.
No, well, 2 things, Paul. Sorry, David, I think you might have misheard what Paul said. Paul said he didn't want to deprive
I understand
the other town departments.
But he also said,
no,
KP,
okay, I'm sorry then.
I don't want KP to thrive at the expense of other town departments. You're not thriving. And you can't keep saying that because, Paul, I appreciate what you do and I appreciate the tough fiscal restraints you're put under, but you cannot say that KP thrives if at the same time you're also saying, I'd like to do this, this, and this. And I'm sorry that one of our towns cannot face an override. We've done multiple, I've lived in this town for 4 years. We've done a bunch of overrides for schools, for everything else. If Plainville can't face it, it's not my problem.
David, can I ask what you're suggesting for this?
Thank you. I'm being antagonistic. I admit that I'm being antagonistic. Right. But at the end of the day,
is that, and I understand what you're saying, David, and I also stand your position, Paul, but the problem is that Plainville has gone to get an override and they don't get them. And again, this is the whole conversation that we had last year when I wanted to fund the schools fully, both KP and Norfolk, and just hope for the best, which I would like to point out, I was right for the most part. I'm just going to say, but I was told emphatically no, because the money has to come from somewhere. And even though I knew we had the rainy day fund to help offset anything we didn't get from the state aid, we were still told no. And you can't get money if there's nowhere to get it from. So if Plainville doesn't have the money, unfortunately, they're in the district. I don't really see how we can kick a school out of the district. I would love to see exactly what David's saying. I'm a big proponent of fully funding our schools. I've said that from day one. That's my biggest position, both on the advisory board and in this town, is limiting zoning and fully funding our schools. Those are my sort of wheelhouse things. but you have to, as we've talked about, you have to have the money from somewhere. So I appreciate the balance, but if you can't get the tax override approved, you can't get the money.
So I think I come back to the fact that as your superintendent,
if they cut, my point to that was, if they cut last year by 10% to get the increase that we asked for last year, how do we really expect them to do that this year? Are we really asking Plainville to cut another 10+% from their budget to fund KP because they got outvoted? I mean, I want to see KP fully funded. I want to see 100% of KP back to school, but it has to come from somewhere. Let me just hear what Kevin has to say, because I think he wants to add to this topic. You're still muted.
Double mute gets me every time. So what we do each year is, me and my counterparts in the sister towns, we connect and we talk about the challenges that we're facing and some expectations high level that we could look at going into the fiscal year. In our last discussion with Plainville, they fully acknowledge the fact that they are in a very tough spot. They are going to be bringing forward a $1.9 million override to their Springtown meeting in hopes of being able to restore some of the things that were cut last year. As Paul outlined, it was pretty severe. They also acknowledge the fact that it doesn't matter if they have a 10%, a 5%, a 3%, or a 1% increase in their KP allocation. They don't have the money to fund it. But it doesn't matter because they have to make it work. So if it means that they have to find cuts in the police department, cuts in the fire department, cuts in the school, if Rentham and Norfolk agree to a number, they need to meet it. And that's going to be a priority for them to have to do. And that's for them to figure out how to do. They're required to make that commitment and to find that money. So I don't want to get caught up with what are we going to do if they can't do it. That's not what we should really be getting caught up with right now. We should be worrying about what we want to do for our town and what we feel is best for our students. Plainville's got their own problems and they'll have to figure out how that works, but we really can't get wound up with that. Just my perspective. Thank you.
If I could just build on that, Dave, Kevin, what you said to respond to David as well, that there are 3 towns, and that's where the balance comes in as well. That we know that Plainville is said, if Rentham and Plainville, if Rentham and Norfolk vote for it, we've got the budget, we've got that KP budget no matter what. We also have to put together a budget that both Norfolk and Rentham will agree to as well. Remember, at the request that we're putting out to you now, 3.46, Rentham's budget, their ask is over 4%, or just about 4%. So that's why we have to balance all of this together. And again, we're getting a level service. Larry spoke to you about over $1 million worth of technology that's brought in. We're actually getting more than 3.5% of an increase in our budget because we reduced in other areas to cover costs to keep things going. So we feel comfortable bringing you a 3.46% budget increase, and your piece of that being 2% or just about. If we felt that we desperately needed more to make sure that your students got a quality education, we would be putting that on the table, and then it would be up to you to tell us we can't fund it, and we would live with whatever you gave us. But we did put together what we felt was a responsible budget for next year, and I think we stand by that.
And just to add to that, I mean, part of the reason why the increase is only 3.46%, 2 of our biggest areas of our budget are health insurance and special education tuition. We showed you in the presentation that through next year's budget, we'll have decreased special education tuition by almost 50%. Now, part of that is because kids have aged out, they've moved, whatever, but part of it is we've also built in district programs that are much more cost efficient to operate, same as Ingrid talked about with her budget. So we've saved, that's a lot of money that has been saved through that. And then with the health insurance, which again is part of our budget, not part of other budgets, we've had less than an average of 3.5% increase on health insurance the last 4 years. So we've had those 2 major areas of the budget have shown, in one case, a very big decrease, and the other one a much smaller than typical increase. And so that's allowed us to the flexibility, like Paul said, within the budget to growth, to add things, to grow things, to expand programs without having to increase the bottom line. So on the one hand, I'm happy to, I think we'd be happy to submit you a budget that had a much bigger increase, but and like Paul said earlier, we would, we could definitely find ways to spend it. But again, it's a balance between, one of the slides we put up, out of the 106 at the budget hearing is at the very beginning is we try to build a budget that is both responsible and realistic. So a responsible budget, we define as one that meets the needs of all our students through a goal setting process, strategic plan, school improvement plan, et cetera. And the realistic part is to make the best use of existing and additional resources. So we talked about the ways we've saved through operational efficiencies, and we've tried to be realistic in going to towns like we talked about, so we could go through the exercise of submitting a budget that's a 5%, 8% increase. And in the past, that's probably been done. Paul and I, this is just a philosophy on our part. We find that to be just an exercise in frustration or whatever you want to call it, aggravation, I don't know. We understand it's a tough situation when you have to rely on other towns to fund your budget. This is the second regional district I've worked in, and I know almost every, all the other people in other regions, and it's all the same thing. It's a tough thing to do. So we feel that pain, and so we're just trying to balance out. Next year, when if you went back and showed that chart of the annual increases by town, I don't want to say Norfolk is due. I don't want to jinx anything like that, but sorry, Kevin. So you may be having a different reaction next year when you see our budget.
And I have two things. I understand. I appreciate the effort you guys have to go through every year to get this done. I'm tired of hearing about Plainville's drag on this, frankly. And I've lived in town longer than either one of you have worked for the KP school district. So, and I've heard it every year. At the end of the day, I understand what our role is, and I understand what we have to vote for. And I'm not shouting up and down about you need to force this up higher. I get tired of hearing about it, frankly. Having said that, I'm going to step aside and allow people to ask legitimate questions about parts of the budget. So I just don't like to hear, about the balance that you have to balance every year, because it's, and to answer Larry's question, if it came to us next year, it's more than likely we would pass an override to do that comparatively to the other two towns. If you put the odds on it, we're more than likely going to pass an override.
I mean, I think I agree with you. I think we have better odds than Rentham and Plainville do of passing an override, but I don't think that would go over well at all.
I'm not arguing that. I'm just
overrides are notoriously difficult to pass. They take a lot.
Maybe Plainridge can put those odds on the table.
When stuff hit the fan, we did it.
I think that passing an override for an expenditure like the fire department or a build out or what we would consider a large like capital item like that, the roof on the school, things like that, people can get on board with that. I don't think this town specifically, and I think that's probably where Rentham and Plainville get into their trouble too, is passing overrides for what would be considered normal budgetary expenses. People don't like to see that. You don't budget your money the right way. Why would we give you a tax override? Getting a tax override should be reserved for major expenses like a school expansion or a fire department expansion, things like that, things that can actually have a benefit and then come off the balance sheet.
I'm not saying that I'm not proposing that. I'm simply saying that we have got a better record than the other two towns in terms of operational overrides over the last 20 years. And that's what I'm saying, because we've done them. So
All right, well, luckily we're not in
now I'm biting my tongue and I'm not going to argue this anymore.
Well, luckily we're not in that position right now.
No, we're not. Thank you.
Todd, do you have a question or a comment to add to this topic or something else?
So I'm going on 5 years of being finance director, and thank you, Paul, Larry, for always bringing a fantastic budget. Basically, first go around, it's pretty much been spot on. Prior to the Paul and Larry show, KP would always bring us a budget in excess of 10 or 12%. Usually, that's their first go around, and that's been presented to the select board, been presented to the advisory board before we whittle it down. And we go back and forth with them before they finally say, okay, we can live within a 3.5 or whatever. And they've been doing that years before I even started here. But the 2 years that I've experienced it with them, that was the process. Started in December, get their first numbers, January and February, back and forth. And basically it went from 10% down to 3.5, or they're 4% operational. And then it's spread out. And some years, we'd be hit with 5% for us, 1% for Plainville, 2% for Rentham. I mean, the formula is all over the place. Rentham and Norfolk pretty much subsidize Plainville based on the formula and how it's allocated. So if we did a straight per head count, the numbers would be even more dire for Plainville. So we're picking up actually a piece for Plainville in this scenario. We're not going to get out of that. That's the formula, and we have to live with it. But yeah, David, to your point, this has been brought up, but we always work out to get to where we kind of are now anyways. KP can ask a lot more, and they certainly can, but still the two towns have to agree at the end of the day what's going to work in their budgets.
3 towns.
What?
You said the 2 towns. The
2 towns have to agree.
The other 2 towns. The 3 towns have to agree. Todd, I'm not arguing. I'm sorry. I'm being
right. It only takes 2 towns to vote yes for the budget that's being presented. The third town has to acquiesce and take whatever their portion is. But the rule requires, by law, only 2 towns have to vote the budget.
Right.
So if you get 2 towns aligned, as we probably do this year, Rentham and us, the budget's going to move forward as is. Could they have brought something more? Absolutely. But what does that translate? We got to take the money from somewhere. We're still $100,000 short. We got to figure that out. So where do we take the money from? If you're going to present and say we should give more monies to them, I'm 100% agree. They're great people and great organization, but so is Norfolk Schools. We just had a presentation here tonight. They have a long list of needs. And, we have a fire department and police department. Being the safest town in the community is not easy to do. If we start taking police off the roadways, that's going to change. So, I mean, it's a balancing act. I equate it to the actor who's up there on stage with the plates spinning, and which one's going to break if we don't keep them all spinning. So, again, Paul, Larry, you guys have been fantastic when you came on board. The budget process has been so much smoother, so much easier. You've enlightened a lot of people explaining the process. Still can't predict what next year's allocation is going to be, even though we know what the formula supposedly is, but that's going to change next year. So again, Dave, we've been down this road. It's a continuous process. Yep. And guess what, Dave? Next year, we're going to do the same thing.
Brian?
So I think to the conversation earlier about the tolerance we have for an override for operating expenses, I know one of the things that we talked about in the fall board was a reserve account for the schools. It is hard to budget for something that can go, looking historically, between 5% annual increases down to 0.19. So that is just hard when it bounces around like that. If there is a way that we could have a school stability fund created so that when in 2 years we see our allocations will go up, that we could have forward contributed to it So we don't have to go to an override for operating expenses. I think we as an advisory board need to think about how are we going to plan in advance for things that are purely demographic changes and predictable, so that we can prepare for those future operating expenses when it comes our turn, and we're not driving towards an override for operating expenses or displacing the rest of our accounts to try and match that need.
Thank you, Brian. Kristen, hi. I know you started to say something earlier when we were on this, and I'm sorry that you got spoken over a couple of times. I apologize for that. But you also had a question in the chat, and I just wanted to check in with you to see if you have all your questions answered and make sure that you got a chance to speak.
Yeah, I do. It was just about the END and kind of what that represented. And it's just trying to make sure I understood. It was kind of like the reserve from year to year that was carrying forward. So it was more of a technical question about what that represented and what was, I guess, normal. And Todd had sent some information over about like what a typical reserve might look like for other districts. So that.
Yeah, I mean, the Department of Revenue posts all of the regional school district E&D balances, but I don't know what they are as a percent of their budgets.
Yes, I did do the quick math for you all. It's less than half a month of operating expenses, so it's not much that you guys have sitting around in case. I know that sometimes we get to town meeting and people feel like that's kind of should be used to zero, right? That if it's there, why aren't we using it? There's a lot of, it's similar to the conversation about free cash that we have, but I think it's important to kind of look at that in context of your overall budget being, you know, in the 30 millions, or is that the number? Yeah, 37 million. It's about half of 1 month of operating expenses. So not flush with cash over there. But I was just trying to get a sense of relative proportion and if that's typical, and it seems like it is.
I have one question that is completely off topic from what we've discussed so far. We spoke last year, pre-COVID, before we knew COVID was an issue. So it may have actually even been the year before. I apologize, about trying to come up with ways to get our out of district placement numbers down. Obviously things got derailed because of COVID, and that's been the focus of you guys at this point, Paul, but has there been any more movement on that, on trying to get that number lowered? I know that if I remember right, from 2019, a large portion of the out of district cost was coming off of the balance sheet in 2022. Is that still the case, or do I have my numbers wrong?
So Susan, the slide that Larry had showed you was mitigating costs. We've reduced our out of district costs by 48%.
Mm-hmm.
When I arrived, we had 59 students in out of district placements with varying tuitions that went along with that.
Right.
We have built programs internally and have kept virtually all of the students in King Philip at King Philip. So we've sent virtually no students to new placements. The couple that have gone have actually been move-ins that have already been out of district placements, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had students who have either graduated or exited out. And so by next year, we project that number will be in the low 30s.
I think that's what I want to say.
That's what we're looking. We're looking at it about, as Larry said in that slide, we've reduced our cost by about 48%. So
right.
if you look at the numbers of the students, it doesn't work out exactly because some student tuitions are more than others.
Right.
But we built those programs internally, not just for the cost factor, because it's the right thing for our students.
Absolutely.
Should be in the neighborhood schools with their siblings, with their neighbors, with their peers. It's the best way for them to learn to socialize in an environment and to be part of the community. And so we're very proud to have them in our buildings. And additionally, what we're doing is we're working with the elementary schools on shared definitions, on common programming, so that we can help to prevent students from being placed in out-of-district placements at the elementary level, that those tuitions then continue into KP in the high school. And so we've had some great conversations. The special education directors now work very, very well together. And as you've heard Dr. Alati and I say, we meet monthly, actually over the COVID, we meet weekly. We've written grants together. We're building curriculum together. We're building shared vision for special education together. So the work has gone on in a variety of different ways. It's something I'm very, very proud of. And I shouldn't say proud. It makes it sound like it's me. I'm proud of the work that everybody has done. It's been a truly team effort to really do what's right for our students. And I think it's been working really well.
Well, I'm happy. I'm happy to see this number. I know that I have spoken to you in the past. You may not remember because again, it was pre-COVID and it seems like everything is about COVID these days. But about you looking into Weston has a program called the Goal Program, which really focuses on keeping all, even kids with severe issues in-house. And that's, I didn't know if you are familiar with that program, if you've had a chance to look into it. It obviously, when I spoke to you about it the first time, I understand the initial cost of setting it up. It can be daunting, but over time, it lowers the out of placement special ed costs drastically.
So Susan, for 12 years, I was a special education director. I started my career, for 10 years, I was a special education teacher. And I'm married to a special education director. My wife is a special education director. So as I said, I couldn't agree more. We build programs internally. That's why our numbers have gone down, because we haven't had to place students out because we've recognized the importance of building them in. Getting to a zero placement outside of the district is usually impossible because there are often students that have such a specialized need that to build a program that also offers them peer models and the real intricate needs, sometimes it makes more sense to send them to a specialized school. And I'll use a couple of disability examples. Deaf, blind. There's very specific training. And so if it's a low vision student that we can put a vision specialist in and support the student within the school, that might be one situation. But in another case, we might have to send a student out because it's so specialized and we only have one student that needs that programming. And so it actually is cheaper and more efficient and a better program for the student than building it. But as a SPED director, I built programs. As a superintendent in my last district, I built programs. And Lisa Moy, our director of student services, and I have been building them here. So some of the costs you've heard us talk about, Larry and I, in our budget over the last few years is while we've reduced that cost, the total savings hasn't rolled into other parts of the budget. You've seen an increase in special education staff and related staff services because part of that is around cost avoidance. We've built programs to keep our students in to avoid the out-of-district programming, if you will. So I hope all of that makes sense, but I'm very aware of all of the programs out there. Like I said, it's a passion of mine. I actually serve on a national special education board.
Well, I can tell you based on the years that I've been involved with both the KP school budget and on the advisory board, even though when you come here, sometimes it feels like we're ganging up on you a little bit. So I apologize for that. But overall, we do appreciate it. I see a huge difference, just like Todd mentioned, I see a huge difference with you as a superintendent than we had in the preceding years. So your hard work is very much appreciated. And I especially see the progress that you've made in the special ed department. So I like seeing those numbers, not just for financial reasons, but like you said, for inclusivity reasons. So keep up the good work. We love seeing in-house programs. I know they can be expensive at times to get started, but they are a benefit both to the community and to the budget. So I appreciate that. Todd, did you have something to add?
Yeah, going back on Proposition 2.5 overrides. So Norfolk has had 5 of them that have taken place since the year 2000. 3 of them have failed. 2 of them passed. One was for $1.1 million. That was in 2006. And prior to that was 2001 for $400,000 to shore up the budgets But again, out of the 5 that we've had, 3 of them have failed. The 2 latest ones, which was 2009 and 2011, those both failed. And those were kind of with the impact of the 2008 debacle, trying to get back to where we needed to. So again, it's going to be a tough sell, like you talked about earlier, Susan, with Prop 2. I don't know how it would play out.
Yeah.
Especially with its budget.
I have, my experience has always been that it's much easier to get an override approved when it's for a large expense versus for operating expenses.
Right. And we know what the percentage budget increase is for KP. Our overall budget currently right now is about 3.53. Again, that's not completely settled as of the moment, but historically speaking, over those, going back all those years, back to 2000, budget increases year over year, the average has been about 4.42. So we're below our average now with our budget. And everybody's telling us, reduce the tax rate. So contemplate me this. How do you reduce the tax rate? How do you increase budgets? And how do you make KP a bigger budget? And how do you make Norfolk a bigger budget all at the same time?
You can't.
There we are.
We also don't generally see tax rates go down. And I've said this both on the community page and in meetings before, even though it seems like our taxes are higher because our property values are higher, our tax rate is actually significantly lower than, not necessarily every single year in the past 50 years, but there have been a lot of years in the past 50 years that Norfolk's been at a 27, 28, 30% tax rate on property taxes. So I think we're at 16 right now. So, but of course it is a lot of money because the property values are significantly higher now than they have been in years past. So it does, I do sympathize and understand when people are paying such high tax bills that it seems like it's the tax rate when it's actually just the property values. So, all right. Does anyone have any questions for Paul and Larry? If not, we can excuse them if they'd like and debate amongst ourselves how this evening went, or we can continue on with some more questions. Should we have them? No one? I just want to make sure that there's a couple of members on the board that didn't speak, and I'm assuming it's because they don't have any questions, but I just want to check in with them and make sure there's no statements they'd like to make or any points they want to have heard before anyone leaves. Jackie and Michael, anything at all? No, Jackie says no. No. Okay. All right. All right. Thank you, Paul and Larry. As always, we appreciate everything that you do.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to share this with you. And
thank you very much, gentlemen.
Our pleasure. We really want to emphasize, if you do chew on this a little bit and you have some questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Larry and I would both be very happy to talk with anybody at any point about the budget or any other questions you may have about KP.
Great.
So with that, I say thank you.
Thank you
Have a
so
great
much.
night. Stay well, everyone.
Thanks for having us. Night.
Good night. All right. So the schools were all I had on the agenda for this evening, just because I had a feeling that with their presentations, even though I had asked for them to be short, would probably not be super short. Does anyone have anything they'd like to discuss? Anything they'd like to have heard either on these budgets or on, I know there might have been some leftover questions from last week's zoning issues. Does anybody have anything? I know Kevin and I are both on the B1, so we can answer some of those zoning questions should you have them. I know Blythe's here can answer any of the budgetary questions. I did set out an agenda that lays out both the process of what we're going to be doing for the next couple of weeks, if you haven't had a chance to look at it. And I also I need to work in shorthand. I can't look at the town warrant during the meeting, and I'm always afraid I'm going to miss something when I'm going through and seeing who needs to talk and who needs to present. So I did sort of an article shorthand, so to speak, where it just kind of said, what each thing was about, so that I can make sure that everyone who needs to speak or present is covered. Does anyone have any questions on any of that while I have all of you here?
I don't have a question, but if it's okay, I have a comment related to the zoning articles from last week.
Of course.
And I think it's topical, at least coming off of the school budget conversation. So in reflection a little bit, the conversation we had last week, the zoning changes, in my opinion, are really geared towards loosening restrictions to allow for more development in town center, allowing for more residential build out, and the give to get, right? The trade-off that we're making for loosening restrictions and making it easier for developers to build residences. The give to get is that we're going to expect some commercial space in return, right? And the commercial space would, number one, help improve downtown, right? Number two, also help contribute to the tax base, right? And not have Norfolk continue to be almost fully funded from, on the backs of residents. But my take on what we heard in that conversation about the zoning was the developers really don't have a vested interest in ensuring that the commercial build out happens, right? There's no teeth in the zoning requirements, nor can we make any teeth in there. So a very real and potential outcome is they build densely populated residential buildings that are taller and higher and more densely packed than the zoning currently would allow for, and then leave the first floor empty, whether by choice or whether the economic conditions just don't support it. But we also heard the physical limitations of downtown with wastewater and lack of sewers and parking. It automatically crosses off a pretty big chunk of what even potentially could go there from a commercial perspective. The reason I'm mentioning this now is coming off of the discussion on the school budget. We're already seeing into the future how strapped we're going to be, right? We're already talking about potential overrides, right? We're talking about what happens when that formula boomerangs around and kicks us in the butt the way it's been Plainville the last 2 years. But we're also presented with, the loosening zoning regulations for what I think is a really far-fetched chance of getting the give to get that we're trying to expect, right? The developers aren't essentially required to do it. They're not, they don't have a financial vested interest in making it happen. They make their money, and they said as much on our call. They make their money from the sale of the residences. And putting some designated space for commercial is really just the checkbox to, make sure they can bypass the zoning regulations. Not bypass, but meet these new relaxed zoning regulations. So I just wanted to, I know we're not debating this right now for voting, but I thought this was topical on the heels of the school budget that, I think if we look far into the future, we're going to have to make a choice of, do we want to roll the dice and potentially get a cafe, right? The 1 out of 100 chance, or do we want to have however many residences, having however many kids packed into the schools, stressing our limited water supply, requiring more police and fire and ambulance, requiring ultimately more expenditures per pupil. So I just throw that out there as a comment. I know we're not debating on voting for those now, but I thought that there was a direct correlation between these two topics.
I think that's a really good point. I do recall, I do think that was a bit addressed in the presentation. Maybe I'll look to Kevin to see if I'm saying it correctly. One is that someone could put a 40B in that spot now, whether or not we change the zoning, right? So it doesn't preclude anything anyway, which may mean some people may say, well, then I'm not going to vote for it because it doesn't matter. And some people may choose to see it the other way and say, well, I'm going to vote for it because at least there isn't that 1 in 100 shot, right? To prevent a full 40B that's only residential. The other piece that I feel like I heard in the presentation was some research around when these things are built, are there in fact more kids coming into the schools? And I feel like there is research saying that that wasn't necessarily the case, that it wasn't necessarily resulting in increases in the schools, because the type of folks buying those types of apartments or condos were not typically families. I don't know if that's right or not.
Well, one quick comment is you're absolutely right. People could come in and build 40Bs right now, regardless of the zoning regulations. But I'm not necessarily championing 40Bs, but the upside of a 40B is at the very least, we would make a bigger dent in our affordable housing through 40Bs than we would with these other residences where there's gonna be no requirement for affordable housing at all. So there is, Kevin?
There's a requirement in there, right? Yeah. I think it's tiered. Is it tiered?
Okay. So
yeah, that's correct. It's not going to be impactful to get us to an SHI number that would have any kind of bearing on our 10%, but there is a requirement for affordable development built into those zoning.
Okay, thank you.
We'll be discussing that further in
the
meetings.
The other Kristen comment I have, I don't know the same way no one else knows, but I'm not debating the research, but I would say whatever research has been done in the past is not a good predictor of the future. I think the flight out of cities in the past 12 months has changed so dramatically everywhere. And I don't expect a big push to return to cities soon. So I think the demographics of who is buying, apartments, townhomes, smaller houses in suburbs like ours, in the future, it may have no bearing on what research may have shown in the past. So I just don't think that's something we can point to and rely on as any kind of indicator.
I think that's fair, and I think that I'm actually one of those people that would invite more families to be moving into those places. I think I'm in the minority in this town of feeling that way, but I actually am a big fan of affordable housing for families. So, I know I'm in the minority on that here, but.
Kristen, I do not think that you're in the minority. I think that from a logistical standpoint, my position has always been and will always be that until we make a dent in our affordable housing number, we're always going to be falling behind and we are always going to be subject to 40B projects that we don't want to see. And I'm not trying to sway anyone in any way on how they're voting. I spent years, it feels like, on the B1 committee trying to make sure that the regulations that are brought forth would both benefit the town, but also keep our small town feel in place. As far as what I was trying to say, though, logistically in response to Jonathan, the thing you have to remember is that none of these plans are perfect. No matter what the B1 committee did, no matter what the planning board does, nothing is perfect, because you talk to one developer, which I've talked to a couple, and one developer says to me, who cares about commercial? I can't make any money off of commercial. So what I would do is I would take my lot and build a 40B, because I would rather, even with the 25% hit for affordable, I still make more money if it's 20 units, 20 units, and 20 units by putting 20 units on that bottom floor instead of commercial space. And then you have someone else who says they don't want to do 40B because of the hassle that it is. So I really think it comes down to the developer, how many units they can fit on it, and what their cost per unit is on whether or not they go 40B and whether or not they go by right. So what we really have to focus on, and the reason I'm saying this is what we really have to focus on is not whether or not the developer can put a 40B or whether they're going to get it by right, is what we're doing by right the right way to go? Meaning, is this the correct height requirement? Is this the correct parking number that we want to see? Is this the correct amount of commercial space? Is this the correct amount of frontage and footage from sidewalks? And is this creating the walkable downtown that we want to see? Because we're never going to stop a 40B. We're never going to. There's always going to be a developer who finds that 25% is doable for them based on how much more residential density they can get. And it's really up to the developer how they crunch the numbers, what their banking structure and loan structure is. I mean, that's what happened with, I believe, I hate to speak out of turn because I don't know firsthand. This is what I heard was happening with the 194 Main Street project. It came in one way with apartments, and then they could not get the loan backing to finance that, so they had to change it. Again, I don't know. It's up for sale now, so I don't know what the reasons are for that. I'm not on zoning and I'm not really privy to those topics. I want everybody to focus on, without me saying what I think you should do, I want everybody to focus on is, regardless of whether or not it does anything to 40B, is, are these the zoning changes you'd like to see by right? Because by right zoning and preventing 40B really don't have anything to do with each other. That's what I learned. It took me a long time to learn that, but I did finally learn that. So it's really more about, does this create the look that you think residents want to see? And I've always said this as well, is that I look at my job on the advisory board as not what Susan Klein wants to see, but what is best for Norfolk. Because sometimes they don't align. You know, sometimes what I want doesn't really align with what is best for Norfolk. So, and you don't have to do your job that way. That's not what I mean by that. I'm just explaining how I do it. Sometimes the way I vote in an advisory meeting is not always the way that I vote in town meeting. And these B1 articles very well may be an exact point to that. I may vote one way in our advisory meeting because I think it may be what's best for the town. And when we get to town meeting, I may vote a completely different way. I don't know yet. So that's kind of what I would like for you to look at. I'd like to go to Michael. He had his hand raised, and then I'll come back to you, Kevin.
Yeah. Well, always feel free to call me Mike. It says Michael.
Sorry.
I always look for my mom. But just to make the point, 16 units per acre is really dense. You got to see what a 16 unit per acre building looks like and think about that downtown. Mm-hmm. To your point.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. It's more, I'd like for us, when we have one more presentation, which is, I believe, on the 14th. There is the 13th planning board meeting that could change a couple of things. I don't think it will, but it could before we vote. And then we have the citizen who's coming in who has a petition that is kind of in direct conflict with the B1. So I want to reserve the voting on these articles until after he is presented, not just on his citizen's petition, but also on the B1 articles as a whole. So we are going to be voting on the B1 articles, hopefully on the 14th. I'd loved if we could vote on other things before that, but we may be voting on everything that night. So it may be a long meeting that evening. But yeah, that's basically what I want everybody to go into the meeting on the 14th with, as well as the next couple of weeks, is really just, do these articles represent what the town of Norfolk wants to see? That's kind of the way I think we should approach this. Kevin?
You guys hear me this time?
Yes.
Hey, look at that, I got it. So I'm going to take a break from the throwing MAPC data guidance, throwing bylaw impact analysis, throwing poll results that we've got from the community over the last 2 years. I'm going to take a break from that for a second and just kind of go back to something that I said at the beginning and the onset of the B1 meeting. At the core of this whole thing, we have to present the community with an alternative to the plan that we've currently been enacting for the last 10 years, with a strategy of reacting to these proposals and these other things that have come up from developers as they come in. I know that I've spoken to a lot of people who say, hey, we should have done this with Boyd's Crossing. We should have done that with Rockwood. We should have done this with 184 Main Street. And now we're in a position where those are developed as something that might not necessarily fit into what our expectation was for Town Center. We're taking this opportunity to present what we think is a viable alternative to that strategy, to be able to provide the community with a different option that we think works towards what's listed out in the master plan, what we've heard from people that they want to see in Town Center, and what the town expects in terms of a return on what is our most valuable asset at this time. There is never going to be a perfect set of zoning bylaws. That's one thing I think we've all learned definitively over the course of the last 2 years. There is nothing that is going to point us directly to a specific outcome. But that's why we have these bodies like the ZBA and the planning board to be able to direct those things. We entrust them and we vote for them to put them in those places to guide those projects into what they feel works towards the consensus of the town's expectation. So I think all that I would say is, instead of looking at this with the blinder vision of saying this is specifically something that we're doing for Town Center because it's an initiative in itself, I broaden that a little bit to think about, the way that we've been approaching things up until this point, and identify if this path is a viable alternative compared to what we've been doing in the past. That's what I said. If we go to town meeting and the community comes forward and says, hey, great, that was a great proposal. However, I really still think that there's something better we can do. And I'm okay with it staying as green space with the risk of having it be developed into something like a 40B in the meantime. We don't want to go in and fearmonger people and tell you, if you don't vote for this, well, we're going to get a combo Walmart Home Depot with 150 residents on top. That's not what's going to happen. And nobody thinks that that's viable. But we just want to be very clear and very open about what the possibilities are and how this could possibly work in a different direction for the community. So I look forward to the further discussions. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer whatever I can.
Great. Brian?
Yeah, I think that's good. The real question in my head is, what does the community want it to be? I don't necessarily see that the fact that it hasn't been developed is a failure, right? Like it currently hasn't been developed because at the price per square foot of land, commercial isn't viable. And there's a belief that the zoning changes will happen to make it a residential space. If we're looking at zoning now that gets 16 units per acre, that makes it viable for residential with empty commercial space, like what we heard at the meeting was it takes 16 units per acre to make it viable. By going with that change, we're saying we are okay with it being residential, in which case I would say, why not just make it residential? The only, to Susan's point, affordable housing and by right don't overlap unless by right is affordable, right? There's another option that we say we have a need for affordable housing, and we're going to say that affordable housing is a use case that's okay, and that is one of the by right uses you can have by default. We need to understand what we want that space to be. And if it is commercial as it's currently zoned, we're okay with it. If we want it to be residential, I'd say, why not just make it residential? Because by default, if we're saying we're going to make the zoning requirements so that it is viable with zero commercial income, it's going to be residential, and then we'll get a bonus space that somebody may at some point make a commercial building in. But let's not do half and half, where we make it viable as a commercial or as a residential only, with the hope that there's somebody moving into the commercial space. Or if we want it to be commercial, we should be very declarative and say, we're not going to rezone it, and your land value will be different because we're making it clear that will not be residential usage.
I believe, Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong, that even if it's zoned solely commercial, that doesn't apply to 40B?
No, that's right. That's right.
Kevin, is that correct? Right. So see, even if
40B would supersede that, you're right.
So even if we keep it as straight commercial, 40B can go in there and make it residential anyway.
Right.
I think
but that's the point of 40B.
Yeah.
Like that's great. Like that's the point of 40B.
Yeah. I think that we need to make sure, and again, certainly not telling you how to come to your conclusions, anyone on here, how to come to your own conclusions. It's definitely not my job. I just want to make sure that everyone understands that by right zoning and whether or not a 40B can be there are two totally different things. 40B can do whatever it wants, whenever it wants, within reason. They do still have to go before zoning, and zoning can absolutely, I want to make this clear in case anyone ever asks you, not that you don't know it, but zoning, the process of 40B going before zoning, it can be shaped. You can't stop it, but you can shape it. And they have done that many, many times. I am not saying that the zoning board has always done everything the way that I would want to see it, but they do put a lot of effort into shaping the current 40B projects. They listen to residents. They try to, a lot of times they'll come in, the projects will come in at a number that's astronomical, and the zoning board figures out a way to whittle that number down. I don't think anyone's ever going to be completely happy with multiple 40B projects going on at once. And it's always a point of not in my backyard. Everybody wants it, but nobody wants it in their backyard. Well, it's got to go in somebody's backyard. So, but I think our zoning board has done a good job in the past of shaping it. And I always encourage people when they're complaining, not that anyone here is complaining, that's not what I mean. I mean, for residents specifically, is when they're complaining is attend a 40B, attend a zoning meeting and be heard, because that's really the only way that the zoning board knows what we want to see. So you can do survey after survey, people don't fill them out. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin, I think 500 people filled out the last survey that we had about the B1 in the downtown area. And I know there's more than 500 people in this town who care what the B1 district looks like. They do. We just don't tend to get the responses that we want. So with that said, I just want to make sure that everyone knows the difference in by right zoning and 40B. And then if you have any questions, I want you to feel free to come to me. Not me because I'm Susan, but me because I was on the B1 committee for a couple of years, and Kevin as well. But it's going to come down to, what does your gut tell you the town of Norfolk wants to see? And that's what you're here for. You're here to interpret the articles and try to make the best decision for the town of Norfolk. And we all have expertise in different ways and in different fields, and we should use that expertise to figure it out. Same thing with the budgets for the school. You know, some people are financial people, some people are corporate people, some people are teachers, some people are work in the schools, some people are business owners. We all come at it from a different perspective. And again, that's the job. We have to figure out what is the best way to go about getting this work done for everyone, not just for ourselves. So does anyone want to discuss anything about the budgets before we adjourn? No? Any more questions for Blythe on the town budget? I mean, obviously she'll be here at the next few meetings. There's a couple of articles that she's gonna, speak to when it's time. I just want to make sure there's no outstanding questions, because the next couple of meetings are going to go fairly quickly. We're going to have the discussions and then we're going to go right into voting. So I wanted to make sure we have enough time and to discuss everything ahead of time. Okay. David, do you have any minutes for us?
No, I don't. I'm wondering, given what you said about the last meeting, I may have to reproduce them from basically memory, which.
Yeah, because it happened at the end of the meeting. And again, guys, I can't control that Amy.
I have a vague idea what happened, so I may have to talk to a couple people, but okay. There is a recording from the meeting before that, right? I hope.
The meeting before was recorded because Amy was in the whole meeting.
Then I will try to put together.
And next week.
I will definitely do the meeting from 2 weeks ago, and last week may take me a couple months, so.
Okay. The next 2-3 meetings, I guarantee you, will be streamed on YouTube.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that?
Yes.
Is there any advancement on getting a new administrator?
Oh, yes. Oh, sorry. Thank you for reminding me. Hello, everyone. I would like to introduce you to Erica. Erica is our new admin. And
that's why she's been there all meeting, huh?
She is joining us for the first time tonight. She was a lurker last week, but she interviewed with the town and we made her an offer and she happily accepted. And I believe her paperwork is finalized. Yes.
Yes, as of this afternoon.
As of this afternoon, she is our new advisory assistant. So she will be.
Oh my God, thank you so much.
I know, exactly what I said. So she will be copied on all of the emails. So you will see her name in the emails going forward. She's available should anyone have any questions. And I know, Erica, this is David, who I told you was our clerk, and he was with him on the minutes. And so even though the agenda is done and set for this year, and I have the Zoom link, so I will be hosting all of the meetings, starting the fall, she will go back to hosting them. So you won't have to deal with me. Allergy to technology.
I don't have a Mac, so hopefully we will not have.
You will be a lot better off than I am.
Susan, you did about as well as could be expected given the bizarre circumstances.
Well, and I would also like to point out that I posted it to the community page the day after I got Amy's resignation. I, of course, asked first if I was allowed to do that. And I posted it to the community page, just a general thing. I received about 10 responses. And Erica put her application in, and she's extremely overqualified for this job, I would like to point out. So we are very, very, very lucky to have her. She has a lot of experience in corporate America, and we're happy to have her. She's a stay-at-home mom now and just was looking for something part-time to keep her skills up. So we are lucky. I don't know how long we'll have her, but I'm hoping for a few years. So welcome,
It's
Erica.
the first meeting, Erica.
And I promise they're not all contentious. Sometimes we sing Kumbaya and everybody gets along, and other times, it doesn't happen that way. But everybody, this is Erica. Welcome. And
Welcome.
This is everyone.
Susan, if I may, Erica, I'm probably going to send you an email with kind of my boundaries on minutes and stuff like that, just so you have a sense of where to go and where in other words, don't waste your time doing stuff that you're not going to need to do, kind of thing.
That would be very helpful. I would appreciate
I'm
that.
trying to keep your workload down.
Yep, that's great.
David, Erica and I did speak about the fact that for the next couple of weeks, we would be in crunch time trying to get the warrant printed and everything voted on, and that she should just focus on the current meetings from
absolutely.
each night
Absolutely.
of the next 3 meetings, and that you two could work at whatever pace you wanted to over the summer to get what Carol Green has been asking for, which is a lot of back.
I've already talked to Carol, and I'll take that. Erica will not be involved in that.
Okay. Well, I believe she said she was happy to help with the clerical stuff for that over the summer, and
I think we're cool, but
at her leisure. So
I think we're cool on that, but I hope she's not involved. So
okay.
She shouldn't have to
anything, if you do need anything, I'm here to help. So
All right.
All right.
Great.
So there is nothing else, and everyone is all set for next week's meeting. There are thankfully no presentations to watch for next week's meeting, although there is an energy presentation that I added both to the email and to the agenda. It's just a slideshow if you want to. I believe David had asked for something on paper that he could scroll through. I don't know if anyone else wants to take a look at it, but if you want to take a look at it before we do the energy article next week, and Andy will be here as well to answer any questions on that. And he asked to go first, so we will probably tackle that one first.
Great.
Even though it's not in that order on the agenda, we'll start with energy, and then we'll go into the animal control regulations, which appears to be a lot of information. It could be a short presentation by Hillary and Carol, or it could be very long and involved. Kevin would have a better idea since he worked closely with them on the select board on getting that done. So it could be long or it could be short. And if it's short, we'll move on to voting. And if it's not, we will hold off until the 14th on the voting. So
great.
All right. Anything else? Then I will ask for a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you, Michael. Sorry, Mike. All right, I will see you guys all next week, and I promise I will do my best to have no technical issues next week. So see you then.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Have a good night.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Thanks.